My husband said his family's vacation was adults only, then my daughter sent me a photo that changed everything. I honestly do not know where to start, because if I had read this story written by someone else a month ago, I probably would have thought there had to be more to it. I would have assumed the wife was leaving something out, or the husband had some innocent explanation, or the daughter misunderstood what she saw. I would have bent over backward to give the man the benefit of the doubt, because that is exactly what I did for years. I am 38, married to my husband Brian for 11 years, and we have one daughter together, Ava, who is 9. Brian also has a son from his first marriage named Mason, who is 14. His ex-wife, Lauren, lives about 40 minutes away. And while things have never been warm between us, they have mostly been civil. Not friendly, not hostile. Just the kind of careful politeness people use when they are trying not to create problems for the kids. Brian's family has always been close in that way some families call close, but what they really mean is tangled. His mother, Denise, is the kind of woman who thinks boundaries are a personal attack. His younger sister, Kelsey, can stir up more drama with one phone call than most people create in a year. His older brother, Trevor, mostly stays out of things. But he has spent his whole life going along with whatever keeps their mother happy. Their father, Scott, is quiet and checked out. He sits in the same chair at family gatherings, watches sports, and acts like every uncomfortable thing happening around him is weather. I should probably explain that I have never really been accepted by Brian's family. Not completely. They were polite when we got engaged, excited when Ava was born, and eager to use me whenever they needed childcare, holiday hosting, or emotional labor. But accepted is not the word I would use. Tolerated when convenient is probably closer. I work as a dental office manager, and my schedule is busy but stable. Brian works in commercial insurance and likes to tell people his job is stressful in a way that suggests nobody else could possibly understand pressure. He makes good money, and I make decent money. And we have lived what I thought was a solid middle-class life. Not perfect, but comfortable. We have arguments like anyone else, mostly about his family, his lack of follow-through at home, and the way he turns every conflict into a debate he thinks he can win if he talks long enough. For years, one issue kept coming up over and over. His family took trips together, and somehow I always ended up not quite fitting into the plan. At first it was small things. A weekend cabin trip that I probably wouldn't enjoy, because I do not fish. A Long Beach weekend where they already booked the rooms, before remembering to ask me. A baseball road trip for the guys and the kids, that made sense on paper. I kept telling myself it was not personal. Sometimes families fall into old habits. Sometimes blended family situations are awkward. Sometimes people are thoughtless without being cruel. Then those little things started piling up. When Ava was 4, Denise planned a Christmas cookie day and invited every female relative. Plus Mason, because he loves baking, and somehow forgot to mention it to me until after they had all posted pictures. Brian told me his mother probably assumed I was working. I was not. He knew I was not. I asked why he did not say something, and he shrugged and said he did not want to make it into a thing. That phrase became the soundtrack of my marriage. Do not make it into a thing. She did not mean it like that. You are reading too much into it. They are just different from your family. My family is direct. If there is a problem, somebody says it. If they love you, you know it. If they do not, you also know it. Brian's family specializes in smiling while excluding you. It took me years to stop doubting my own instincts because nothing was ever blatant enough to point at cleanly. Ava has always adored her dad. She is that kind of sweet, observant kid who notices when someone is left out and tries to fix it without making a scene. If we were at a party and she saw someone standing alone, she would quietly go stand next to them. If one kid in her class did not get Valentine's, she would bring extra from home the next day. She is not dramatic. She is not a liar. She is careful with other people's feelings in a way that breaks my heart now because I realize she has probably been protecting mine more than I knew. About 6 weeks ago, Brian told me his mother was organizing a family vacation to a lake house in Michigan for 5 days in July. He brought it up casually while he was unloading groceries, like it was no big deal. He said, "Just so you know, Mom booked that lake place again." I said, "Oh nice. When are we going?" He looked at me in this strange way, not guilty exactly, but prepared. It's kind of an adults-only thing this time. I remember actually laughing because the way he said it sounded ridiculous. I said, "Adults only, but your mother is organizing it." He did not laugh. He said, "I'm serious." I stopped putting away cereal boxes and asked what he meant. He said his mom wanted a quiet trip for the adults. No kids running around, no schedules built around bedtimes, just everyone relaxing. I asked if that included Mason. He said yes. I asked if spouses were going. He said yes, some. I asked who exactly was going. And he gave me that vague rolling list people use when they do not want to be pinned down. Denise and Scott, Kelsey and her husband Jason, Trevor and his wife Megan. Maybe an aunt and uncle for part of it. Brian. Just Brian. I asked, so you are going on a family vacation where all the couples are invited, but not me? He immediately said, that's not what I said. I said, that is exactly what you said. Then he switched tactics and told me I probably would not even want to go because the whole thing sounded like his family in a house for 5 days, which he knows is not my favorite environment. He tried to dress it up like he was sparing me something unpleasant. I asked who made the decision that I was not invited. He said his mother had limited space and wanted to keep the group small. I looked at him and said, small enough to include you, but not your wife. He got irritated then, which was usually his move when he felt caught. He said I was making assumptions. He said I always take things personally when it comes to his family. He said if I wanted to know whether there was room, I could ask his mother myself. But he did not think I should because it would create weirdness. Again with weirdness. Again with not making things into things. I asked him if he told his mother he would not go without me. He did not answer right away, which was answer enough. Then he said, I did not want to start a fight over a short trip. That hurt more than the exclusion itself. Not because I expected him to blow up his family over me, but because he did not even seem to think it was worth a serious conversation. I was not a factor. I was an inconvenience to be managed. We argued for hours that night after Ava went to bed. He insisted I was turning this into a referendum on our marriage. I said maybe it was one. He said I was being dramatic. I said he was being cowardly. He slept in the guest room and left for work the next morning without saying goodbye. For the next few days, he acted like it had blown over. He would ask if we needed milk, mention a show he wanted to watch, send me a meme at lunch. Like we had not just had a fight that changed the way I saw him. I was colder than usual, but I still functioned. That is the thing about marriage. A lot of betrayal happens while someone is still asking if you want tacos for dinner. A week later, Denise called me. That alone was unusual because she almost always texted. Her voice was syrupy and bright, which usually meant she was about to say something nasty in a polite tone. She said, Brian mentioned you were a little upset about the trip. A little upset, like I had pouted over seating arrangements. I said, I was surprised. I thought spouses were going. She gave this theatrical sigh and said, honey, it's really just a space issue. And honestly, I thought you might enjoy having the house to yourself for a few days. I asked, are all the spouses going except me? There was a pause, then she said, well, Megan wasn't sure at first. That was not an answer. I asked again, and she finally admitted that yes, the other spouses were going. She rushed to add that there would be so much family history talk and inside jokes, and she did not want me to feel uncomfortable. I said, you solved that by not inviting me at all. She responded in that wounded voice manipulative people use when they are losing control. I think you are choosing to hear this in the worst possible way. I told her there was no good way to hear that every other spouse was welcome except me. Then she hit me with what I now think was the first accidental truth. She said, Brian didn't think it would be this big of a deal. Not she, Brian. I asked what she meant. She backtracked immediately and started rambling about schedules and sleeping arrangements and how hard it is to please everyone. I ended the call before I said something I could not take back. That night Brian came home annoyed, not apologetic. Denise had obviously called him first to complain. He said I embarrassed his mother. I said his mother embarrassed herself. He said she was trying to explain. I said there was nothing to explain because the message was perfectly clear. He asked why I could not just let him go on one trip without turning the house into a war zone. That stopped me cold. One trip, not our trip, not a family trip he was awkwardly navigating. His trip. I asked him if he even wanted me there. He looked away and said, I just want peace. When someone says they want peace, sometimes what they really mean is they want your silence. I should have pushed harder then. I should have demanded straight answers. Instead I did what too many women do when they have spent years being told they are overreacting. I started negotiating with reality. Maybe he was tired, maybe his family had gotten in his head. Maybe this was less about me specifically and more about his mother controlling everyone. Maybe if I stepped back, it would reveal itself for the stupid power play it was and he would realize how wrong it looked. He went on the trip 2 weeks later. The morning he left, Ava asked if she could go say goodbye to Grandma Denise and everyone else at the rental house if they were stopping for breakfast before driving up. Brian said no because they were already running late. She asked if Mason was going. Brian said no, since it was adults only. I noticed how quickly he answered that. Too quickly. Like he was ready for it. After he left, Ava asked me why Grandma Denise always did things without us. She asked it so quietly that it almost sounded like she was asking about the weather. I told her I did not know and that sometimes grown-ups make choices that are more about themselves than anyone else. She nodded in that solemn way she has when she is trying to understand. Disappointment. For the first 2 days of the trip, Brian texted intermittently. A picture of the lake. A plate of grilled food. A selfie with Trevor on a boat. The messages were normal enough that if I had shown them to someone else, they would have said I was lucky he checked in at all. But there was something performative about them. Too casual, too curated, like he was building an alibi made of ordinary details. The third day, I was at work when my phone buzzed with a message from Ava's iPad. She uses it to text me sometimes if she is at my sister's house after school or wants to ask if she can have more screen time. The text said, "Mom, can you call me when you can?" I stepped into my office and called right away. She answered on the second ring and sounded strange. Not crying, but careful. She said, "Mom, I need to show you something, but don't be mad at me." My stomach dropped. I asked where she was. She said at my sister Jenna's house. Jenna had picked her up from camp that day. I asked what happened. Ava said, "Nothing happened. I just think you need to see this first." Then she sent me a photo. At first I did not understand what I was looking at. It was a slightly blurry picture taken through what looked like a screen door or window. I saw a deck overlooking water. One of those rental property decks with cheap outdoor furniture and string lights. I recognized Brian immediately because he was leaning against the railing in the same blue swim trunks he had packed. Next to him was Mason. Mason, very much a child, very much not an adult. And not just Mason. There were 3 other kids in the frame. One I recognized as Kelsey's 10-year-old daughter, Harper. Another looked like Trevor's son, Luke, who is about 6. The fourth was turned away, but small enough to clearly be a child. In the foreground, sitting in a chair close to Brian, laughing at something he was saying, was Lauren, his ex-wife. I stared at the picture so long that Ava finally said, "Mom?" I asked her where she got that photo. She said one of her friends at camp, Harper's cousin, had shown her pictures from the lake house on a parent's public social media page because they all know each other from school events and sports. Ava recognized Dad, Mason, and Grandma Denise right away, and then she saw Lauren. She took a picture of the post with the iPad because she thought if she just told me, I might think she got confused. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down. The trip was not adults only. The trip was not even no kids. It was no me. I asked Ava if she had shown anyone else. She said only Jenna because she did not know what to do. I asked to speak to my sister. Jenna got on the phone already sounding furious. She said she had tried to calm down before calling me because she did not want to make it worse. While I was at work, she had taken screenshots from the social media account before the story expired. There were more photos. In one, Denise had captioned a group shot. "So happy to have almost everyone together." Almost everyone. In another, Lauren and Denise were standing in the kitchen smiling over wine glasses like sorority sisters reunited after spring break. In another, Brian and Mason were in a kayak while Lauren stood on the dock taking the picture. I went from shock to humiliation so fast it made me dizzy. You know that awful feeling when the truth rearranges the entire past in your head. When one thing suddenly makes 10 years of smaller things line up in a pattern you cannot unsee. That was what happened in that office at work while I was staring at my sister's screenshots. It was not just a rude vacation exclusion. It was a deliberate lie with moving parts. It required planning, coordination, multiple people agreeing that I would either never find out or would find out and be expected to swallow it. I left work early and drove straight to Jenna's house. Ava ran to me the second I walked in and looked terrified. Like she thought she had broken our family by showing me the truth. I hugged her and told her over and over that she did nothing wrong. I told her I was proud of her. I told her she did the right thing. She started crying then, quiet tears soaking into my shirt, and said, "I thought maybe if you knew, it would make sense, because I knew it wouldn't be adults only if Mason was there." It was such a child's logic and so painfully clean. She knew the story did not add up. She trusted her own eyes more than the adults around her. I wish I had done the same years ago. After Ava settled down with a movie in the other room, Jenna and I went through the screenshots. There were at least 12 people at that lake house. Kids, couples, Denise's sister and her husband, Trevor's family, Kelsey's family, Brian, Mason, Lauren, It was basically a full family vacation plus Brian's ex-wife and minus his actual wife and daughter. The detail that sent me over the edge was a group picture on the dock. Everyone was lined up by family unit. Denise and Scott in the middle. Trevor with Megan and Luke. Kelsey with Jason and Harper. Mason standing between Brian and Lauren. Like they were still a family. My sister asked if I wanted her to call our mom and have her come over. I said no. I did not want a committee. I wanted clarity. I texted Brian one word. Call. He called within 2 minutes, sounding relaxed. Too relaxed. Like he had not just detonated my marriage from 3 states away. I said, why is Mason there? Silence. Then he said, what? I said, don't insult me. Why is Mason there if this trip is adults only? He took too long to answer again. Then he said, Lauren dropped him off for a couple days. I almost laughed because the lie was so bad. I said, so your ex-wife dropped off Mason for a couple days and then stayed too. He asked where I got that from. I said, I have pictures, Brian. Another silence. Longer this time. Then he said, it's not what it looks like. That sentence should be tattooed on the forehead of every liar. I asked him to explain exactly what it was. He said Denise thought it would be nice for Mason to have extra time with his cousins. I said fine, then why lie to me and Ava that no kids were going? He said the plan changed after they got there. I said really, because your mother posted. So happy to have almost everyone together, which sounds pretty planned to me. He got defensive and said I was acting like he had committed some unforgivable sin. I said, you told me your family vacation was adults only so you could exclude me and our daughter. Then you took your ex-wife. He said, Lauren is only here because of Mason. I asked if she was sleeping in the house. He said yes. I asked if she came up separately. He said yes. I asked if I was supposed to believe Denise spontaneously invited her after telling me. There was not room for me. He said, you are twisting everything. That is when something in me just went cold. Not hot, cold. The kind of cold that arrives after humiliation burns itself out and leaves behind plain facts. I said, come home tomorrow. We are done pretending this is normal. He said I was overreacting again. I hung up. He called back 5 times. I did not answer. Then came the texts. First defensive, then angry. Then conciliatory in that fake way that still centers his inconvenience. Can we talk when I get back? Please don't do this in front of Ava. You know nothing happened. My family always blows things up and now you are too. I should have told you Mason was coming, but it wasn't some grand conspiracy. Lauren was already bringing him so mom said she might as well stay one night and then it turned into more. I saved everything. That night Ava asked if dad was in trouble. I told her dad had lied to me and I was very upset, but none of it was her fault. She asked if he lied to her too. I said yes, he did. She got very quiet and asked if that meant he loved Mason more. That question cracked something inside me because I knew where it came from. Ava had always noticed when Brian bent over backward for Mason in ways he did not for her. Then excused it as trying to make up for divorce guilt. If Mason forgot cleats, Brian would leave work to drive them over. If Ava had a recital, Brian might come, but only if nothing else came up. Not always, but enough that she noticed. Enough that she asked questions like that. I sat on the edge of Jenna's guest bed and told my daughter that a parent making unfair choices does not mean they love one child more. It means they are making unfair choices. I told her adults can fail their kids without it being the kid's fault. She looked at me for a long time and said, are you going to let Grandma Denise say sorry and then everything goes back? Children are so much smarter than people think. I said, no. Brian came home the next evening. He walked into our house carrying his duffel bag and wearing the look men wear when they think the hardest part is over because they have physically arrived. He probably expected tears, yelling, a long circular argument he could outlast. He did not expect me to have spent 24 hours turning over every interaction, every lie, every apology that wasn't, and landing somewhere far more dangerous than anger. Calm. I had Ava stay at Jenna's for the night because I refused to do this in front of her. When Brian came in, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a folder of printed screenshots and the credit card statement open on my laptop. I had already seen that he had paid for a grocery run near the lake house 3 days before they left town, which meant someone local or someone arriving separately had not just spontaneously shown up. He had been involved in provisioning for a bigger group the whole time. He said, are we really doing this like a courtroom? I said, you made that decision when you lied. He dropped his bag and sat down looking tired and annoyed. Not remorseful, annoyed. He started with the same line. Nothing happened. It was not what it looked like. His mom complicated things. He did not know how to tell me once the plans changed. He was trying not to upset me before the trip because I had already been sensitive about it. Sensitive, another nice little word people use when they mean justified but inconvenient. I slid the screenshots across the table one at a time and asked him simple questions. When did you know Mason was going? Before we left. When did you know other kids were going? Before we left. When did you know Lauren was going? He hesitated. A day or two before. I asked why he did not tell me. He said because he knew I would be upset. I asked why I would be upset if there was nothing wrong. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I asked if Denise was the one who wanted Lauren there. He said yes. I asked why. He said because Denise and Lauren have kept a relationship for Mason's sake. I asked if he thought it was appropriate for his mother to exclude his wife and daughter from a family vacation while inviting his ex-wife. He said when I put it that way, no. I said how else exactly should I put it? Then the truth started coming out in pieces, not because he suddenly became honest, but because liars get tired and details trap them. The lake house had been booked months earlier. At first, Denise did intend to call it adults only because she wanted wine, cards, late nights, and what she called grown-up time, but then Kelsey refused to leave Harper behind because her babysitter situation fell through. Trevor and Megan did not want to leave Luke. Denise complained, but she caved because she always caves for the children she actually values. Mason was added in early because Lauren had a work training and asked if Brian could take him for those days. Denise then invited Lauren to stay because it felt easier for the handoff. I asked when he found out kids were included after all. He admitted it was at least a week before the trip. I asked why he still told me and Ava it was adults only. He said because by then he knew how bad it would look if the trip became family-friendly, but I was still not invited. He hoped maybe I would not find out exactly who was there. He said that, out loud, to my face. I asked him to repeat it, and he would not. I said, so you knew it was wrong. He said, I knew you'd see it as wrong. That distinction told me everything. Wrongness, to him, was not about the act. It was about my reaction. I asked the question I had been circling all day. Why did your mother not want me there? He rubbed his forehead and said he did not know. I just stared at him until he stopped pretending. Then he said Denise thought I am distant, judgmental, and not really family-oriented with them. I laughed at that because I had hosted Thanksgiving twice, bought every birthday gift nobody remembered, sent condolence flowers to relatives I never met, and spent years arranging my life around their constant last-minute demands. He said his mother also thinks I make things uncomfortable because I do not automatically agree with her. There it was, the real crime. I do not submit. I asked if Ava was also unwelcome. He said no, not exactly, but since I was not invited it would have been awkward to include her. Awkward for whom? He had no answer. Then I asked the question that had been building under all the others. Did you like that she was there? He looked confused, then said, who? Lauren. He said, this is not about that. Which means yes, it was. I asked again if he liked getting to play Happy Family for a few days. He denied it immediately, but too quickly. He started talking about Mason and co-parenting and not wanting conflict. He said Denise sometimes gets nostalgic and pushes weird ideas, and it is easier to go along than fight her. He said he never meant for it to hurt me this much. I said, that sentence only makes sense if you knew it would hurt me some. He stood up then and started pacing, which he does when he thinks movement makes him look less cornered. He said he was tired of being in the middle between me and his family. I told him he was not in the middle. He was on their side and using the word middle to avoid responsibility. Then he said something I will never forget. He said, sometimes I just want things to feel uncomplicated, as if I were the complication, not the lying, not the exclusion, not the emotional cowardice, me. I asked if uncomplicated meant his ex-wife, his mother, and his old life where everybody arranged themselves around his comfort. He said that was unfair. I told him maybe, but it was not inaccurate. What came next is the part one keep replaying because it was both subtle and devastating. He sat back down, looked me dead in the face, and said, I didn't think you'd actually leave over this. Not I am sorry, not I can't believe I hurt you, not I understand why you're devastated. I did not think you would leave. Meaning he had already calculated the damage and assumed I would absorb it. I asked him if this was the first time his family had excluded me with his knowledge. He denied that there had been deliberate exclusions before. I brought up the cookie day, the beach weekend, the baseball trip, the anniversary dinner his mother held for his brother and sister-in-law where spouses were invited. But I found out afterward. He had an explanation for every single one. That is another thing about chronic dishonesty. Individual moments can always be rationalized. The pattern is what convicts them. We argued until almost midnight. At one point he cried, which would have moved me years ago. Now it mostly made me tired because his tears always came after consequences, never before choices. He said he loved me. He said he loved Ava. He said he had screwed up. He said he would set boundaries with his mother. He said he would cut contact for a while if that was what I wanted. I asked him why I should believe any promise he makes now. He had no answer. I told him to sleep in the guest room again. He asked if I was seriously considering separation. I said I was seriously considering what kind of mother I would be if I taught our daughter that. This is what marriage looks like. The next morning, Denise called. Then texted. Then called again. I did not answer. Finally she left a voicemail so manipulative I almost admired the craftsmanship. She said she was heartbroken, that there had been misunderstandings, and she never meant to make anyone feel left out. She said Lauren being there was strictly logistical. She said the children's attendance had changed at the last minute. She said families are messy and she hoped I would not punish everyone forever over one trip. One trip. Again. Like the problem was not betrayal. It was my memory. I forwarded the voicemail to Brian and said, "Your mother is still lying." He replied, "I know." I expected him to call her out then. He did not. Instead he asked if we could all sit down together and clear the air. That nearly made me throw my phone across the room. The fantasy of these people is that if they can get everyone in one room, force a conversation, and wear you down with noise, then the truth becomes just one version of events among many. I refused. Over the next few days, more information came out from places I did not expect. Megan, my sister-in-law by Trevor, texted me privately and asked if I was okay. We were never especially close, but there had always been a kind of quiet understanding between us. I said no, not really. She called me during her lunch break and, after some hesitation, admitted that everyone knew I had not been invited. She said Denise told the family I didn't really want to come and preferred having time to myself. Some of them believed it. Some did not. Megan said when Lauren arrived, it got weird fast. Especially because Denise kept making comments about how nice it was to have old times energy. I asked what Brian did during all that. She said, mostly he acted like if he stayed agreeable, nobody could accuse him of anything. That was so exactly Brian that I almost thanked her for phrasing it better than I ever had. Then she told me the worst part. The first night, Denise had everyone do a family photo on the dock. Brian initially said maybe they should wait because not everyone was there yet. Denise replied, "Close enough. Close enough." I had to sit down after hearing that. My marriage had apparently become optional scenery in his mother's preferred family portrait. And my husband's objection was so weak it did not even count as one. Later that same day, Lauren texted me. That shocked me because Lauren and I had never texted outside of logistics involving Mason and Ava. At joint events, her message said, "I think I owe you an apology. I didn't know how this trip had been presented to you until the second day. I should have left when I realized." I stared at that for a long time before answering. We ended up speaking on the phone for almost an hour. I would love to say she was a villain because that would have made things cleaner. But she was actually more honest with me than my husband had been. She said Brian told her Denise insisted she stay because it would be easier than driving back in forth with Mason, and because there were plenty of rooms. Lauren assumed I and Ava had simply chosen not to come or had other plans. On the second day, Kelsey apparently made some snide remark about how certain people never blend in no matter how long they're around, and Lauren asked who she meant. That is when she realized I had not declined an invitation. I had never received one. Lauren said she confronted Brian privately and asked if I knew the trip had changed from adults only. He told her yes and that I didn't care. She said she did not fully believe him, but she did not want to create a scene in front of Mason. She admitted she should have texted me right then and did not because she was worried about making things explode while her son was in the middle of it. I do not love that she stayed, but I respected that she at least told the truth once asked. Then she said something that made my skin crawl. Denise had told her during the trip that it's nice when the right people are around the table. Lauren said she immediately understood that as a dig at me and felt sick. She said she left a day earlier than planned because the whole atmosphere started feeling gross. I thanked her for telling me. I really did. If someone had told me years ago that my husband's ex-wife would one day offer me more decency than he did, I would have laughed in their face. When Brian came home from work that evening, I told him I had spoken to Lauren. His entire body changed, not anger, exactly, alarm. He asked what she said. I said enough. He wanted details. I refused. For once, he did not get to manage the narrative. A week after the trip, I met with a lawyer. I know some people will say that was extreme, but I had crossed a line internally that I could not uncross. The vacation lie was not an isolated event. It was a bright, ugly summary of my role in that family. I was useful. I was presentable enough. I was expected to be mature and flexible and understanding. But when there was a real choice between my dignity and their convenience, they chose convenience. Every time, the lawyer, whose name is Rachel, listened quietly while I explained the situation. She asked practical questions about finances, the house, childcare, and whether there had been any infidelity I could prove. I said I did not know if there had been physical cheating, but there had definitely been emotional dishonesty and a pattern of exclusion. She said in our state, that mattered less than people think for the legal side. But it could matter a lot for settlement dynamics because people do not like what they look like. Under scrutiny. That sentence stayed with me. People do not like what they look like under scrutiny. I started documenting everything: screenshots, voicemails, texts, notes from calls, calendar records of trips, events, and childcare patterns. I pulled together financial documents because if I had learned anything that week, it was that confusion benefits the person already getting away with things. At home, Brian cycled through every possible strategy. First came denial, then minimization, then blame, then grand gestures. He brought flowers, he cooked dinner, he asked if we could start counseling immediately. He offered to cut off his mother. He cried again. He said he was ashamed. He said he had been weak, not malicious. He said he panicked once the trip changed and kept making worse choices because he did not know how to fix it. Maybe that part was true. But panic does not explain the deeper issue. Panic does not explain years of allowing me to be sidelined. Panic does not explain why his first concern was whether I would leave, not whether he had broken something precious. The real breaking point for me came from Ava. A few nights after Brian got back, she asked if Dad was still mad at her. I said, "Why would Dad be mad at you?" She looked down and said, "Because I found the picture." Apparently Brian had spoken to her while I was in the shower and asked where she had seen the lake photo. He did not yell, but he did tell her that sometimes adults have private situations children do not understand and she should have come to him first. My 9-year-old took that as blame. I saw red. I waited until Ava was asleep and then I confronted him. He said he was just trying to find out how the picture got out. I said no, he was trying to make a child feel responsible for exposing his lie. He insisted that was not his intention. I said I no longer care about intentions when the impact is always the same. That was the first time I told him directly that I was considering divorce. He sat down like someone had unplugged him. He said he thought we were still in the fix-it stage. I said fixing requires trust and truth, and right now I do not have either. He asked if I would really break up our family over one mistake. I said I was not breaking up our family over one mistake. I was refusing to keep living inside a system where I am expected to swallow humiliation to preserve everyone else's comfort. He slept somewhere else that night. I do not know where. Maybe a hotel, maybe his brother's. I did not ask. The next day Denise showed up at my house without warning. That woman has never respected a boundary in her life, so I should have expected it. But I was still stunned when I opened the door and saw her standing there holding a casserole dish, like she was arriving for a church potluck. I told her this was not a good time. She pushed past the threshold anyway and said we needed to talk woman to woman. I almost laughed because the audacity was unbelievable. She set the casserole on my counter and launched into a speech about family misunderstandings and how hard it is when outsiders interpret traditions the wrong way. Outsiders. She really said it. I asked if she heard herself. She said she did not mean outsider in a bad sense. Just that I was not there in the early years and sometimes history matters. I said, I have been married to your son for 11 years. We have a child together. She clasped her hands and said, of course, and no one denies that, but Lauren will always be part of the family because of Mason. I said, and I am not. She immediately backpedaled, but it was too late. The truth had slipped out again. Then she tried the old tactic of reframing cruelty as sensitivity. She said she worried I would be uncomfortable watching everyone reminisce about Brian and Lauren's early marriage, old vacations, stories from when Mason was a baby. She said she did not want me to feel left out. I told her excluding someone is not how you prevent them from feeling left out. She said I had never really embraced their family culture. I asked if family culture meant being quiet when she lies. She said I was hostile from the beginning. I said no, I became distant after years of being treated like a guest in my own marriage. What she said next sealed everything. She told me I should be careful not to punish Brian for trying to keep the peace between important women in his life. Important women, plural, like I was one category among several, competing for a position around him. I asked her to leave. She refused. She said she had every right to fight for her son's marriage. I told her if she cared about his marriage, she should have acted like I was his wife before now. Then I picked up the casserole, walked it to the front door, opened it, and held it out. She finally left, crying and furious, promising I was destroying the family over pride. Maybe, but if pride means refusing to be publicly erased and privately gaslit, then fine. Pride. After that, I asked Rachel to begin drafting separation paperwork. I did not file immediately because I needed to think about timing, school, finances, and living arrangements, but internally, I had made my choice. I was done sacrificing my sanity to people who benefited from my self-doubt. The weirdest part was how many small memories came back once I stopped defending everyone. The time Denise introduced me at a party as Ava's mother, instead of Brian's wife. The way Brian once called Lauren for advice about Mason's school issue but brushed me off when I wanted to discuss Ava switching classes. The Thanksgiving where Kelsey made a joke about starter wives and forever wives, then smirked when the table went quiet. The anniversary trip Brian took with me to Charleston where he spent half of dinner texting his family group chat because Denise was planning some reunion and wanted everyone's opinions except mine. The Christmas photo card where Denise used a picture of all the grandkids and spouses except me, claiming she thought I wouldn't like that shot. At the time, each thing was small enough to explain away. Together, they form a map. One thing people do not talk about enough is how betrayal is rarely shocking because it is totally new. It is shocking because it finally becomes undeniable. For about a week, I said very little to anyone outside my sister, the lawyer, and one close friend named Natalie. Brian moved between the guest room and his brother's house depending on the day. He kept asking if we could start marriage counseling before I made any permanent decisions. I said I would think about it. But honestly, I think counseling only works when the person who hurt you fully understands what they did. Brian kept trying to reduce this to a communication problem. It was not. It was a character problem. Then came another twist. Trevor called me. He is not someone who calls people. Ever. He is the human version of a shrug. So when his name popped up, I answered immediately. He sounded awkward and miserable. He said he wanted to apologize for his role in the trip. He knew it was wrong. Megan had called him out repeatedly. He admitted that their mother pushed the narrative that I had declined and that once he realized that was not true, he should have said something. He said he did not because every family conflict gets twisted until everyone is defending themselves and he is tired of it. I told him being tired is not an excuse. He agreed. Then he said Brian had been talking more and more over the last year about how easy it was to be around Lauren because they no longer had expectations on each other. Trevor insisted Brian never said he wanted Lauren back or anything like that. But he had made comments about how co-parenting events with her were simple compared to constant tension at home. That hurt in a different way. Because it meant Brian had been painting me as the difficult one to people who already wanted to believe it. Trevor also said Denise has always hoped Brian and Lauren would somehow drift back together. Not necessarily romantically in a formal sense, but emotionally. Enough for family pictures. Enough for nostalgia. Enough for her to feel like the original story of her son's life was restored. I thanked him for being honest. But after I hung up, I sat in my car in the driveway and cried so hard I got a headache. Not because I wanted Brian back by then. I did not. But because I realized how thoroughly I had been standing alone inside my own marriage. The people around him had a whole emotional ecosystem built on minimizing me. No wonder every conflict felt impossible to resolve. I was arguing facts while they were preserving mythology. Brian noticed the shift in me after that. I stopped debating, stopped asking for explanations, stopped reacting to every message from Denise or Kelsey. I handled Ava's routines, went to work, spoke to my lawyer, and answered him only when necessary. He finally understood that silence is a lot more serious than yelling. One night he asked me point blank if there was anything he could do to save our marriage. I said yes. He looked almost relieved. Then I told him, you would need to become someone different than the person who made all of these choices. He started crying again. I did not. Because that was the truth. If he had come home from that trip horrified by his own behavior, called his mother out, reassured Ava, told me every detail without spin, maybe there would have been a path. Hard, painful, but maybe. Instead he lied until pictures cornered him, minimized until witnesses contradicted him, and then tried to shift the conversation toward my reaction. That is not a man who made one bad call. That is a man whose reflex is self-protection even when it costs his family. As for Ava, I put her in with a child therapist for a few sessions because I wanted a neutral adult helping her process all this. She loves both her parents, and she should not have to carry the weight of what she uncovered. Her therapist said Ava presents as highly perceptive and emotionally responsible for her age. Which is a nice clinical way of saying she notices too much and tries to fix too much. Hearing that made me cry in the parking lot after the appointment. I never wanted my daughter to learn womanhood as endurance. I never wanted her to think love means being chosen last with a smile on your face. So that is where I am now. Brian is still trying. Denise is still sending martyr messages through other relatives. Kelsey posted some vague nonsense online about people who confuse victimhood with strength, which tells me she is exactly as rattled as she should be. Lauren has kept her distance after apologizing, though she did send one final message saying she hopes I do whatever brings peace to me and stability to Ava. Weirdly, that was one of the more decent things anyone has said through this whole mess. I have not told the full extended family what I am doing yet because I know once that starts, everyone will have an opinion and very few of them will have facts. But the facts are actually simple. My husband told me his family vacation was adults only. He let our daughter believe it too. He went anyway. The trip included children. It included his ex-wife. It included everyone except me and my child. When caught, he lied, minimized, and let a 9-year-old feel guilty for revealing the truth. Maybe some people can get past that. Maybe some people think this is salvageable. Maybe if this had happened in a vacuum, it would be. But it did not happen in a vacuum. It happened at the end of 11 years of being asked to doubt my own eyes. I do not anymore. Story number 2. I found a hidden phone in our guest room. The first voicemail made me call my lawyer instead of my husband. I found the phone because I was looking for a fitted sheet. That sounds stupid, and honestly, if you had told me 6 months ago that a stupid fitted sheet would blow up my marriage, I would have laughed in your face and gone back to folding laundry. I'm 36, my husband Ethan is 39. And we live outside Charlotte in a neighborhood full of 2-story brick houses, cul-de-sacs. And people who pretend they are way more chill than they actually are. We have 2 kids, Lucy who is 8 and Carter who is 5. Ethan works in medical device sales, which means he dresses like a golf brand threw up on him and spends half his life talking about flights, surgeon dinners, quotas, and territory. I do marketing for a home builder, mostly remote. Which means I work from home 4 days a week and am somehow still the person everybody assumes can handle school pickup, dentist appointments, teacher gifts, birthday RSVPs, and finding missing shin guards. From the outside, we looked fine. Actually, from the outside, we looked great. We had the nice house with the black shutters. The backyard with the string lights. Ethan insisted on hanging himself even though he almost fell off the ladder. The annual beach trip to Seabrook. The framed family photos in matching fall colors that I secretly hated because no one in real life smiles like that for 12 consecutive pictures. We hosted 4th of July burgers. We went to neighborhood Christmas parties. We had a joint Costco membership and a shared iCal like normal adults. But for about a year, things had been off in a way I kept trying to explain away. Ethan had gotten more secretive with his phone. Not in the cartoonish, lipstick on the collar way. More like subtle weirdness. Turning the screen down when I walked by, taking calls in the driveway, clearing browser tabs, acting distracted during dinner, then oddly cheerful 10 minutes later. If I asked what was wrong, he'd say work. If I asked more than once, he'd get irritated and tell me not everything was a crisis. There was also money tension. 3 years ago, after my grandmother died, I inherited a pretty significant amount from the sale of her lake house in Tennessee. Not private jet money, but enough to wipe out my student loans, help with our down payment when we moved, and keep a decent amount invested under a trust my grandmother had set up. Ethan always said he respected that it was mine, but every time he got excited about some business opportunity, my money somehow came up. Last year he and his younger brother Kyle got obsessed with this idea of buying into a medical spa franchise with another guy from Ethan's gym. Every conversation sounded like 3 men who had listened to one podcast and now thought they were private equity. I said no. Not because I'm mean, but because Kyle has declared at least 6 things, guaranteed winners, in the 12 years I've known him, including crypto, a food truck, short-term rentals 2 hours from anywhere, and something involving golf simulators and bourbon lockers. Ethan took my no harder than I expected. He kept saying I didn't believe in him, that I treated him like a child, that I'd rather let money sit around than use it to build something. I said my grandmother did not spend her life savings so his brother could open Botox Dave and Buster's. He did not appreciate that phrasing. Around then, he started sleeping badly. He'd stay up late in bed scrolling, then get up at 5 for workouts or flights. He snored when he drank bourbon, which was often. A few nights a week, I would end up in the guest room just so I could sleep. It became a thing, not a dramatic separation, just one of those quiet married people arrangements you never imagine when you're engaged in. Picking china patterns. The guest room was upstairs across from Lucy's room. It had a white quilt, navy curtains, and the old oak nightstands from Ethan's first condo. It was also where I took my therapy calls because it was the only room in the house with a door that locked and decent light. After my dad died 2 years ago, I had a rough stretch with panic attacks. Nothing cinematic, just chest tightening, crying in the pantry, waking up at 3 a.m. Convinced everybody I loved was going to die. I started seeing a therapist over Zoom and kept doing it even after I felt better because it helped. Ethan knew that. That part matters. The week I found the phone, my cousin Mallory from Atlanta was supposed to come stay with us for a long weekend with her baby. I was washing sheets, moving the little basket of guest towels back into place, and trying to decide whether it was worth pretending the room always looked that clean when she visited. One corner of the fitted sheet had slipped behind the bed frame, and when I bent down to grab it, I noticed a charging cable running behind the nightstand that definitely wasn't for the lamp. At first I thought Lucy had snuck an iPad charger in there. Then I moved the nightstand out a few inches and saw an old black iPhone wedged between the baseboard and the bed frame, face down, plugged in. Not tossed there, hidden there, like tucked deep enough that you wouldn't see it unless you were on the floor. I remember just staring at it for a second, because my first thought was weirdly innocent. I thought maybe Ethan had stuck one of his old work phones there and forgotten about it. Then I picked it up. The battery icon showed it was fully charged. The wallpaper was just gray. No family photo. No apps on the home screen except the basic ones. No passcode. That was when my stomach did that cold, dropping thing that happens before your brain catches up. There was one red badge on the phone icon. I opened it. A voicemail tab was already visible. The top one had come in that morning from a number saved as Page Office. I hit play. A woman's voice said, cheerful and efficient, "Hi Ethan, it's Rebecca from Paige Holloway's office." She reviewed the April and May recordings from the guest room phone, and she agrees they're helpful. Especially the parts about the anxiety medication and mixing wine with it. She still wants the Morgan account statements before she files the temporary custody motion. And she said absolutely do not discuss separation until the quitclaim is signed. Call me back before 5 if you want to get ahead of next week's timeline. I listened to it twice because I genuinely thought maybe I had misunderstood English. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed because my knees went weak. Temporary custody motion. Guest room recordings. Do not discuss separation until the quitclaim is signed. Not if. Until. I didn't call Ethan. I called Tom Reynolds, the attorney who handled my grandmother's trust in the house purchase when we moved. He is in his 60s, wears bow ties on purpose, and has always had the slightly dramatic energy of a man who enjoys being the smartest person in the room. I only meant to leave him a message because it was Thursday afternoon. But he picked up on the second ring. I said, "Tom, I think my husband has been secretly recording me and maybe planning to file for custody and something involving the house." He went very quiet. Then he said, "Claire, do not call your husband. Do not mention the phone. Do not alter the device. Bring it to my office now." I asked if I should pick up the kids first. He asked where they were. I said camp and aftercare until 5:30. He said good, come straight there. So I did. I put the phone in a Ziploc bag because I'd seen too many crime shows, grabbed my purse, texted Ethan that I was running errands before camp pickup, and drove 25 minutes into South Park trying not to throw up. Tom had me come through the side entrance. He was already waiting with a younger woman I didn't know, probably early 40s, brunette. Crisp navy sheath dress. The exact kind of person who looks like she bills in 6-minute increments and wins arguments for a living. He introduced her as Paige Holloway. Yes, the Paige from the voicemail. For one humiliating second I thought I had somehow marched into the enemy camp. But then he explained she was a family law attorney in his building and that Rebecca was just a common first name, different office, different Paige. I burst into tears from sheer nerves and embarrassment. Paige handed me tissues and said, very calmly, "Let's slow this down. Start from the top." So I did. I told them about the phone, the voicemail, the guest room, my therapy calls, the anxiety after my dad died, the inheritance, Ethan's repeated pressure about money, the weirdness around his phone, the snoring, the sleeping arrangements, all of it. Tom asked specific questions about the deed, the trust, whether Ethan was on title to the house, what funds had been used for the down payment, whether I had signed anything recently. Whether Ethan had mentioned estate planning or refinancing or account consolidation. That was when something else clicked into place. 2 weeks earlier, Ethan had casually asked me to sign what he said was just a cleanup thing, related to our HELOC paperwork from when we redid the patio. He'd left it on the counter with a sticky note and said his office had a notary coming by the next day so he could handle it if I signed before he left. I hadn't signed it because Carter spilled apple juice on the envelope and I forgot. At the time Ethan seemed mildly annoyed, but not enough to be memorable. Now my whole body went cold again. I told them about the paper on the counter. Tom asked if I still had it. I said I thought it was in the kitchen junk pile with school forms and coupon mailers. He looked at Paige, and that was the moment this stopped feeling like paranoia and started feeling very real. Paige asked if Ethan had ever threatened divorce. Not directly, I said. But lately when we fought, he had started saying things like, "If you can't trust me, then what are we even doing?" and "I'm tired of walking on eggshells in my own house." The kind of phrases that sound generic until you realize someone may have been rehearsing them for a court filing. Tom asked if Ethan knew the guest room was where I took therapy appointments. I laughed, but like a crazy person. He's the one who suggested it because it had the best Wi-Fi. Paige wrote that down. Then Tom did something I'll always be grateful for. He didn't tell me to calm down. He didn't tell me maybe there was an explanation. He looked right at me and said, "Assume he's been planning this longer than you know." It was one of the worst things anyone could have said, and also the most useful. Paige had someone in her office photograph the phone, note its condition, and duplicate what they legally could without tampering. She told me not to power it off and not to log into anything from my own devices. She also told me to go home, act normal, and find that unsigned document before Ethan got there. I picked up the kids, sat through Lucy telling me every detail of camp karaoke, nodded through Carter's full monologue about a dead frog by the playground, and somehow made it home without letting my face crack. The paper was in the drawer under the microwave with takeout menus and birthday candles. It was not HELOC paperwork. It was a quitclaim deed. Specifically, a quitclaim deed transferring my interest in the house to Ethan Cole, a married man, as his sole and separate property. Plus a packet of signature pages that had been folded in a way that conveniently covered the actual language unless you unfolded them completely. I sat on the kitchen floor and just stared at it. The house had been bought with a large down payment from my trust and a mortgage in both our names. But title had been structured carefully because Tom had insisted my inherited contribution be protected. Ethan had grumbled at the time, but he signed everything. And now he had apparently been trying to get me to sign away my share while secretly collecting recordings to use in a custody fight. I took photos of every page and texted them to Tom from the garage so the kids wouldn't hear me crying. He replied in about 30 seconds. "Do not confront. Bring originals tomorrow." Ethan got home around 7 with sushi, kissed the kids, asked Lucy about camp, and gave me a quick shoulder squeeze like nothing in the world was wrong. I almost threw the soy sauce at him. Instead, I said I had a headache and wasn't hungry. He did that fake concerned thing where his eyebrows pulled together just enough for plausible deniability. "You okay?" "Just tired." He nodded and told me not to forget he had an early flight the next morning. I lay awake most of that night in the guest room, staring at the ceiling and feeling physically sick knowing there had probably been a phone inches from my head for months. I kept replaying conversations, therapy sessions. The night I cried to my friend Jenna after Lucy overheard a fight and asked if Daddy was mad at me. The time I told my sister I took half a Xanax and a glass of wine after a funeral because I wanted. One night of not feeling like my skin was buzzing. The night I vented that Ethan made me feel crazy. The night he had come in, stood in the doorway all soft-voiced, and asked if I was doing okay, in a way that now made my stomach turn. He wasn't checking on me. He was checking his setup. The next morning I told Ethan I had to swing by Tom's office because of a trust thing. He barely reacted, which honestly made it worse. If he'd been startled, maybe I could have convinced myself he wasn't deep in anything. Instead he just said okay, grabbed his duffel, and left for the airport. As soon as the kids were at school and preschool, I went back downtown. This time Paige had more. The phone had dozens of voice memos. Most were date-labeled, some were only a few minutes long. Some were hours. There were notes in Ethan's handwriting, or at least his typed shorthand, attached to certain dates. Wine plus meds, admits panic driving, yelled in front of kids, talked about trust not being marital. I actually had to ask Paige to stop reading for a minute because I thought I was going to be sick. On her conference table, there were also screenshots on the phone. Not of an affair, not nude photos, Honestly, I almost wish it had been something that ordinary. Instead, it was screenshots of my online pharmacy history, bank balances from our joint account, my calendar, and one email from my therapist's scheduling portal confirming an appointment time. Tom asked how Ethan could have gotten that. I said I had no idea. Then I remembered that months earlier, after I got locked out of my laptop, Ethan had helped me reset a bunch of passwords. He had said he was cleaning up our shared password manager because it was messy. I felt so stupid I wanted to peel my own skin off. Paige asked whether I wanted to move forward quickly or gather more first. I said I didn't know. She said, then let's talk practical. Practical looked like this. First, Tom filed emergency notices with our financial institutions to flag any unusual attempts to transfer or retitle assets tied to my trust distributions. Because a portion of our house down payment came directly from inherited funds and was documented, he was confident Ethan couldn't quietly erase that without consequences. Second, Paige wanted me to preserve all communications and keep acting normal until we understood the timeline. She also advised me to stop using the guest room immediately, stop taking sensitive calls at home, and check the rest of the house for devices. She had a forensic investigator she recommended if I wanted a full sweep. Third, she said I needed to think very seriously about whether I wanted to be the one to file first. I asked if that mattered. She said, it matters when the other side thinks they're about to ambush you. That sentence gave me more clarity than anything else. Because until then, some part of me was still wondering if maybe Ethan was just talking to a lawyer. In case things got worse. Maybe he was venting. Maybe his mother had put ideas in his head. Maybe this was all awful and manipulative but not fully formed. Then I saw the date on the oldest recording. 7 months earlier. 7 months. This was not a bad week. This was a strategy. Over the next 2 days I lived like an undercover version of myself. I smiled at Ethan when he got back from his flight. I reminded Lucy about library day. I made pasta. I answered a text from my mother-in-law Diane about a brunch next Sunday with. Looks fun, let me check Lucy's soccer schedule. I used the upstairs hall bathroom instead of our ensuite because I couldn't stand the idea of him seeing my face too closely. While Ethan showered Friday night, I checked our shared desktop in the study. He'd always been less careful there because the kids mainly used it for printing worksheets and looking up Minecraft junk. His browser history had been cleared, but the downloads folder had not. There were PDFs with names like Temporary Custody Standards NC, One-Party Consent Recording Home, and Quitclaim Template Final. There was also a spreadsheet titled Post-Sep Budget. I opened it. It had columns for rent on a 2-bedroom apartment in South End, car payment, child support estimate, after-school coverage, and a line item labeled House Proceeds, Refi After Transfer. After transfer. Not after sale. After transfer. Meaning he genuinely thought I was going to sign that deed. Then there was another tab labeled Talking Points. It included gems like, Claire has become emotionally volatile since her father died. She frequently mixes alcohol with anti-anxiety medication. She isolates in guest room and disengages from family. I have been primary logistical parent for months. That last one would have been laughable if it weren't so offensive. This man did not know Carter's pediatrician's name without checking his phone. And then I saw Diane's email. It was a forwarded chain between Ethan and his mother. She had written, if you're serious about protecting yourself and the kids, you need to stop waiting for her to get worse. Claire's family money has made her feel untouchable, and she uses that house over your head. Get the deed done first. Once she's on the defensive, she'll settle. I had never hated anyone's font more in my life. It was all there, not just legal prep, narrative prep, character assassination. Quietly, patiently, over months. I took pictures of everything with my own phone and uploaded them to the secure folder Pages office had set up. That weekend was one of the strangest of my life. Saturday morning Ethan made pancakes with the kids and joked about Carter using enough syrup to embalm himself. Diane came over for an hour and brought blueberries from the farmer's market like she was some sweet southern grandmother in a detergent commercial. She stood in my kitchen discussing a charity luncheon and school auction baskets while I looked at her and knew she had been coaching my husband on how to take my house and paint me unstable. She even touched my arm at one point and said, "You look tired, honey. Are you taking care of yourself?" I smiled so hard my jaw hurt. On Sunday night, after the kids were asleep, Ethan came into the den with 2 glasses of wine and sat beside me on the couch. He handed me one like we were a couple in a streaming drama trying to reconnect. He said, "I feel like we've been off lately." I almost laughed. He kept going, said he loved me, said he worried about me sometimes, said he knew grief changes people and maybe I hadn't fully come back to myself after losing Dad. Said maybe we should talk to someone together because he felt like I was pulling away and sleeping. Upstairs more and more. If I had not known what I knew, that conversation might have worked on me. That's the part that still makes my skin crawl. He was good at sounding tender when he was really laying groundwork. I asked, "Are you unhappy?" He sighed like a man carrying the entire emotional load of civilization. "I'm worried." "That's different." Then he said he had some paperwork he wanted me to look at sometime that week regarding streamlining the house stuff. I said, "Leave it on the counter." He smiled. Actually smiled. I wanted to bite through the wine glass. Monday morning I filed first. Paige arranged it so the petition, along with requests for financial restraints and a motion concerning improper surveillance, hit before noon. Tom handled the property side. They moved faster than I thought possible, which I later learned is what good lawyers do when they suspect the other party has been planning to get cute. Paige also had the house swept by a forensic tech that afternoon while Ethan was at work. There were 3 devices: the phone in the guest room, a tiny audio recorder behind books in the downstairs office, and a Wi-Fi camera disguised as a smoke detector in the bonus room over the garage, where the kids sometimes played and where I had taken a few work calls when the house was noisy. I remember the tech, whose name was Marcus, taking the fake smoke detector down and saying in the flattest voice imaginable, "This one has been active a while." I had to go stand in the backyard because I thought I might pass out. Ethan was served at his office around 2:30. He called me 14 times in 40 minutes. I didn't answer until Paige told me to keep it brief and put him on speaker with her present. When I picked up, he was not angry at first. He sounded panicked. "Claire, what the hell is going on?" I said, "You tell me." He started talking fast, saying he had just been served, saying there had to be some mistake, saying he'd only consulted a lawyer because he felt trapped and wanted information. I told him about the guest room phone, the recordings, the deed, the spreadsheet, the email from Diane. Silence. Then he said, very quietly, "You went through my computer." That was his first instinct. Not denial, not remorse, complaint about privacy. I said, "You hid recording devices in our house." He started swearing, not at me exactly, more like around me. The way men do when they're angry but still trying to remember what version of themselves is safest. Then he said the line I think about the most now. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Not, "It didn't happen." Not, "You misunderstood." "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Paige gestured for me to end the call, so I did. Diane called within minutes. I declined. Then Kyle texted, "What are you doing?" Then Ethan texted a paragraph that began with, "Please let me explain," and ended with, "My mom pushed me to protect myself because she genuinely thought you were spiraling." Spiraling. That word again. You know what my spiraling actually looked like over the last year. Working full-time, making orthodontist appointments, packing lunches, taking Lucy to gymnastics, taking Carter to speech therapy twice a month, keeping track of teacher conference dates, teacher appreciation week, class snack calendars, and every birthday gift for Ethan's side of the family. Sometimes crying in therapy because my dad was dead and I missed him. Sometimes sleeping in the guest room because my husband snored, drank too much, and made me feel lonely even while lying next to him. That was the spiral. That evening Ethan came home anyway. Paige had told me he couldn't just barge in and do whatever he wanted. But until temporary orders were in place, the house was still a shared residence. I had my sister Brooke come over and stay with the kids upstairs while I waited in the kitchen. He walked in looking like a man who had not expected consequences to move this quickly. Red-faced, tie crooked, jaw tight. He dropped his briefcase on the floor and said, "You had me served at work." I said, "You hid devices in my room." He said it wasn't my room. I actually laughed then, because the pettiness of that correction was so absurd I couldn't help it. He started talking over me. Said he never intended to use the recordings unless he had to. Said his lawyer told him to document concerns. Said he was scared I would use my family money to bury him if we split. Said Diane had gotten in his head. Said the deed was just a way to simplify refinancing options. Said the spreadsheet was hypothetical. Said he never cheated. Said he still loved me. A lot of men really do think if they stack enough partial truths around a lie, the lie becomes less ugly. I asked him if he ever planned to tell me before filing. He looked away. That was answer enough. Then I asked the question I had been carrying around like broken glass since Thursday. "Did you listen to my therapy sessions?" He froze. Actually froze. Then he said, "Not all of them." I don't even know how to describe what that felt like. I think betrayal gets talked about like it's one big cinematic explosion. But sometimes it's more like your body realizing before your brain does that the person in front of you is not safe. It was like every cell in me stepped back from him at once. I said, "Get out." He said we needed to talk like adults. I said, "You listened to me in therapy." He tried to say it was only because he was worried. That some of the things I said scared him. That he thought I was unstable and needed help. That he needed to protect the kids. I said, "From what?" He had nothing. Because there was nothing. Brooke came halfway down the stairs then, and Ethan finally seemed to remember there were witnesses. He grabbed his keys and left. I heard the garage door open, then close, then open again because he had forgotten his briefcase. Which would have been funny if my whole body wasn't shaking. The next week was pure chaos. Temporary orders gave me exclusive use of the house while the surveillance issue was being addressed. Ethan went to stay in a furnished apartment his company used for traveling reps. He got scheduled parenting time with the kids, which I did not oppose because despite everything, he has always loved them and they love him. But Paige made it clear that any attempt to weaponize my therapy or prescription history would be met with the full force of documented reality. It turned out Ethan's plan was dumber than he thought and uglier than I knew. His attorney, the real one whose office left the voicemail, was apparently working off what Ethan told them, not some grand criminal conspiracy. Once Paige's office sent notice about the recordings, the devices, the therapist scheduling portal access, and the attempted deed transfer, his legal side got a lot less aggressive very quickly. They were still his lawyers, obviously, but they were no longer pushing emergency custody like they thought they might be. Diane, on the other hand, went feral. She called my mother and cried about how I was destroying the children's stability. She texted Brooke that I had always been emotionally theatrical. She left me a voicemail saying, "I hope when this settles, you can admit your part in making Ethan feel desperate." Desperate. That word made me laugh because Ethan had not looked desperate when he was building a budget for his post-separation South End apartment and estimating proceeds from the house he hoped I'd sign over. Kyle tried reaching out twice to tell me Ethan had been under a lot of pressure, and that men sometimes make bad decisions when they feel disrespected. I blocked him. The hardest part was the kids. Lucy knew something was wrong immediately because children are not stupid. She asked why Daddy was staying in the travel apartment, and whether he was coming back before her soccer tournament. Carter mostly wanted to know whose turn it was to do bedtime stories on which days. We told them the marriage version of the truth. That Mom and Dad were having grown-up problems, that none of it was their fault. That both of us loved them. Then I drove to Target, sat in the parking lot, and ugly cried over a bag of washable markers and goldfish crackers. My therapist, who learned very quickly why I was no longer taking sessions at home, was amazing. Also furious on my behalf in the professional, measured way therapists get when they're trying not to say exactly what they think of your husband. The forensic report on the devices came back about 10 days later. The guest room phone had been placed there about 7 months before I found it. The office recorder had been active off and on for 5. The bonus room camera was newer, about 6 weeks. There were also indications that files had been exported multiple times. When Paige walked me through that report, she said, "This wasn't impulsive." I said, "I know. But knowing and feeling are different." The part that hurt the most wasn't even the legal ambush by then. It was the intimacy of the betrayal. The fact that he knew exactly where I went when I needed privacy and safety. And he turned that place into a trap. The fact that he heard me grieving my father, worrying about our daughter, venting to my sister. And instead of feeling tenderness or concern, he sorted it into evidence. A month after I found the phone, we had our first mediation prep. Ethan looked terrible, not movie star terrible, real terrible, puffy-eyed, wrinkled shirt. The kind of man who had clearly stopped sleeping and maybe started reading internet advice written by divorced dads who think every problem can be solved with leverage. He apologized then. A real apology, kind of. He said he had let fear and his mother and the money stuff warp his thinking. He said after I refused to invest in the spa deal, he started feeling like I had one foot out the door and all the power if things went bad. He said he convinced himself I was already preparing to leave, so he started preparing first. He said once he talked to lawyers and they told him to document his concerns, he felt justified. Then he admitted he got carried away. That was his phrase, carried away. As if secretly recording your wife in therapy was like getting too competitive in fantasy football. I asked him if he ever actually believed I was a danger to the kids. He cried, not a dramatic sob, just the kind of crying a person does when the true answer exposes them. "No," he said, "I thought if it got ugly, I'd need something. Something." That word sat between us like a rotten thing. There was no affair, at least not that I ever found. No secret second family. No hidden gambling debt. Just entitlement, resentment, cowardice, and a mother who treated marriage like a chessboard. Sometimes I almost wish it had been a simple affair because at least then the script would have been familiar. This was worse to me. This was someone studying my vulnerabilities and organizing them in folders. Mediation is still ongoing, but here's where things stand now. The house is almost certainly not becoming Ethan's sole and separate property, which I would love to tell you with more grace than I feel. Because the inherited funds were documented and the attempted quitclaim never happened. He does not get to rewrite that history because he got sneaky. The surveillance issue gave Paige a lot of leverage. Ethan's side has backed off almost every aggressive custody argument. Funny how that works when the man claiming concern for the children is also the man hiding devices around the house and listening to his wife's therapy. Diane is no longer welcome in my home, which she treats like an outrageous injustice instead of the natural consequence of being a nightmare. Lucy now says things like, "Dad's apartment smells like new carpet and sadness," which is both devastating and, unfortunately, accurate. The guest room is being repainted next week because I still can't sleep in there. Brooke says the current color looks like trauma beige, which is the first thing that has made me genuinely laugh in a while. And the phone. I still think about that phone almost every day. This plain black iPhone tucked behind a nightstand like some cheap thriller prop. Except it was my life. My house. My marriage. My therapist. My kids' voices in the hallway while I cried on the other side of the door. I think about how close I came to signing that deed because I was busy and distracted and trusting. I think about how if Rebecca from that office had been slightly less careless with her voicemail, I might have put the phone back and convinced myself it was nothing. And I think about the fact that when I heard that message, my first instinct was not to call my husband and demand answers. It was to call my lawyer. Which, in hindsight, tells me I understood exactly what kind of marriage I was in before I was fully ready to say it out loud. Story number 3. My wife kissed me goodbye before her 3-month work assignment. Then my neighbor asked why her car never left. I do not even know what subreddit this belongs in anymore because part of me wants relationship advice, part of me wants legal advice, part of me wants to know if I am losing my mind. And part of me just needs to say this out loud somewhere before it eats a hole through my chest. I am 34, my wife Lauren is 32, and we have been married for 6 years. Together for 9, no kids, one house in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. We have the kind of life that looks boring from the outside, but in a good way. 2 decent jobs, a dog named Baxter, a cracked concrete driveway I kept saying I would patch. The same grocery store every Sunday. The same takeout place every Friday when neither of us wanted to cook. I thought boring meant safe. I thought predictable meant stable. I thought if something blew up in my life, I would see smoke first. 3 months ago, Lauren told me her company was sending her to Nashville for a temporary assignment. She works in medical billing compliance for a healthcare network. Not glamorous, not exciting, which I guess is part of why I never questioned it. She said one of the regional offices was understaffed after 2 people quit and a third went on maternity leave. They needed someone they trusted to clean up a mess for about 3 months. She said her boss made it sound like a career opportunity and a test for promotion. She was not thrilled about leaving, but she said saying no would make her look bad. I remember that whole conversation because it was so normal. I was standing at the kitchen counter cutting strawberries and she was sitting on the stool by the sink with one sock on and one off, scrolling through emails on her phone. She sounded annoyed, not secretive. She even rolled her eyes and said, "I swear if I have to spend an entire summer in a sad corporate apartment with fake art and one frying pan, I'm expensing every miserable second." I laughed. I kissed her forehead. I said we would make it work. That was how it started. For the next 2 weeks she acted like someone preparing for a real trip. She ordered travel-size stuff. She bought a new suitcase because the wheel on her old one was busted. She had 2 late meetings, which fit her story. She printed some documents from the office printer in our spare room and stacked them in a folder with her company logo on it. She talked about Nashville traffic and whether the apartment would have a gym. She even sent me 3 apartment listing screenshots and asked which one looked least depressing. Looking back now, I replay every detail like I am reviewing security footage after a robbery. The day she left was a Monday. She wore black slacks, white blouse, tan trench coat because it had been raining off and on. She hugged Baxter, kissed me twice, then pulled back and said, 3 months is going to suck. I told her it would go fast. She laughed and said, "You say that now because you're not the one eating microwave eggs in corporate housing." Then she left. I stood in the doorway and watched her load 2 suitcases into her blue Honda CR-V. She backed out, waved through the windshield, and drove away. That was the last normal moment of my marriage. For the first week things were believable. She texted me from the road. She said she stopped for gas near Louisville. She sent me a picture of a hotel room with a terrible floral bedspread and the caption, "If I disappear, tell the police this carpet did it." She called me that night and complained about her back hurting from the drive. The next day she texted me good morning, sent a picture of coffee in a paper cup, and told me she had a full day of onboarding at the office. After that, there were smaller updates. She said the apartment was fine but smelled weird. She said the team down there was a mess. She said she missed Baxter. She said one woman in the office had already asked if she wanted to go line dancing and she was too tired to pretend that sounded fun. It all sounded like Lauren. That is what kills me. She did not suddenly become a movie villain twirling a mustache. She sounded like my wife. We settled into a routine. She would text during lunch. We would FaceTime a few nights a week. Not every night, because she said she was exhausted, which I accepted because she looked tired. Sometimes she would answer from what looked like a beige apartment wall. Sometimes from inside her car. Once from a grocery store parking lot. There was nothing dramatic enough for me to grab onto. She was slightly distant, but I told myself long distance does that. Then, about 3 weeks in, my neighbor Denise stopped me while I was dragging the trash cans back up the driveway. Denise is in her late 50s, divorced, retired early from teaching elementary school, and knows everything about everyone on our street. Not in a malicious way exactly, more in a human neighborhood watch with bird feeders way. She notices packages, loose dogs, strange vans, and whether your grass looks thirsty. If the apocalypse starts, Denise will know before the government. She was watering her hanging plants when she called out, "Evan, can I ask you something weird?" I said sure. She asked, "Did you leave your other car with family or something?" I said, "Other car." She pointed with the hose nozzle toward my house. "Lauren's Honda, I keep seeing it." I laughed automatically because my brain rejected the sentence before it processed it. I said, "No, Lauren drove to Nashville." Denise frowned. "Then whose blue SUV is that?" I turned and looked at my driveway. It was empty. I remember the exact feeling in my stomach. Not panic at first, more like a record scratching in my head. I asked when she had seen it. She said, "A few times." I asked what a few times meant. She shrugged. "I don't know, honey. Twice for sure, maybe 3. Late at night one time. Early morning another. I just assumed she came back early or maybe I was mixed up." I told her she must have been mixed up. She immediately looked embarrassed and said maybe she was. I laughed again, thanked her, and went inside. Then I stood in my kitchen for a full minute staring at nothing. There were 1,000 logical explanations. Similar car, Denise mistaken. She sees a lot from her porch and not all of it clearly. Maybe Lauren had stopped home without telling me for some reason. Maybe she had let a coworker borrow the car and flown. Maybe. I texted Lauren, asking how Nashville was. She replied 15 minutes later, "Same as yesterday." "Why?" I said, "Denise thought she saw your car here." Lauren sent back, "Lol, Denise needs glasses." Then a minute later, "Wait, is she okay?" I said yes. Lauren replied, "Tell her I said hi from Sad Country Music Land." That should have settled it. It almost did. But for the first time I found myself looking more carefully at everything. The next week I noticed little things. She was suddenly less available for FaceTime after dark. Her texts came in bursts and then long gaps. When we did video call, she was usually sitting in dim light. Once I asked her to show me the apartment because I was curious and she laughed it off, saying it was a disaster and she did not want me seeing her depression laundry chair. That was normal enough. Another time I asked if she wanted me to visit one weekend. She immediately said the next few weekends were bad because they were rolling out a new audit system and she would barely have time to breathe. I let it go, but the doubt had already moved in. A few days later I was putting away laundry in our bedroom when I opened Lauren's nightstand, looking for spare batteries. She used to keep some there. Instead I found a folded receipt from a gas station in Dublin, Ohio, dated 4 days after she had supposedly arrived in Nashville. I stared at it for a long time. Dublin is less than half an hour from our house. I told myself there were explanations. Old receipt, random receipt, something from before. Except it was folded around a protein bar wrapper I knew she bought all the time. That night I called her instead of texting. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding winded. I asked where she was. She said, "Outside the apartment." "Why?" I said I found a receipt from Dublin from last week. There was a pause. Then she said, "Oh, that makes sense." It did not make sense. She said she had forgotten to tell me that after driving to Nashville she had to come back the next Day because her work laptop had some security token issue and the spare device was at our home office. She said she drove back overnight, grabbed it, got gas, and drove straight back because she did not want to deal with shipping company equipment. I asked why she had not mentioned driving 8 extra hours round trip. She said because she was exhausted and pissed and it slipped her mind. I asked why she did not just wake me up if she had been at the house. She said it was late and I had work the next day. I asked why Baxter had not gone insane if she came in. She said maybe he did and I slept through it. Her tone changed by the end of the call. Less defensive, more irritated. She said, "Evan, if you think I'm lying to you, just say that." I should have said yes. Instead I backed down because the alternative felt too big. I said I was just confused. She said she understood. We said goodnight. I barely slept. From there things got strange fast. I started checking the security camera logs. We have a video doorbell and one floodlight cam over the garage. Not some full surveillance setup, just enough to catch porch pirates and raccoons. I had not looked because I rarely do. There were clips missing. Not all of them, just odd gaps at night. The camera had recorded normal things like me getting home from work, Amazon deliveries, Denise walking her schnauzer. But on 2 nights there were 30 to 40 minute offline gaps between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. At first I thought it was our Wi-Fi. Then I checked the router history. No outage. Then I checked the account settings. Someone had logged into the camera app from Lauren's phone twice during those same nights. I felt cold all over. I still did not know what I thought was happening. I just knew I was not crazy. I called my friend Marcus the next day. He is one of those guys who sounds calm even when the building is on fire. We have known each other since college. He works in IT security and has seen every possible version of human stupidity with phones, passwords, and hidden apps. When I told him the short version, he was quiet for a second and then asked, "Do you want reassurance or do you want the truth?" I said the truth. He said, "Then stop confronting her before you have facts." I hated hearing that because it made me feel sneaky and pathetic, but he was right. Every time I asked Lauren something, she came back with a quick answer that sounded just plausible enough to keep me off balance. Marcus came over that Saturday with coffee and a legal pad like we were investigating a homicide. He looked through the camera logs, the router history, the timestamps on Lauren's texts, and the photo metadata from the Nashville pictures she had sent me. That was when the floor dropped out. The hotel room picture she sent the first night in Nashville was not taken the first night in Nashville. Marcus pulled the metadata and showed me it had been taken 9 months earlier. Same with the coffee cup picture. Taken weeks earlier. I remember laughing when he showed me because it was so absurd my body did not know what else to do. I kept saying, "No way. No, that can't be right." Marcus said it was right. He asked whether Lauren ever shared location with me. She used to. We both had Find My enabled for safety, especially when traveling. When I checked, her location sharing had been turned off, because no location available. Marcus said that by itself meant nothing, but not combined with everything else. That night I barely answered Lauren's texts. She asked if I was okay. I said long day. She sent a heart emoji. I stared at that stupid heart for 10 full minutes. Sunday afternoon Denise knocked on my front door holding a plate of banana bread and a look that said she had gossip she was not sure she should share. She asked if now was a bad time. I said no. She stepped inside and lowered her voice immediately. "I think I did see Lauren." My hands actually started shaking. She said 2 nights earlier she had let her dog out around midnight and saw Lauren's car parked 2 houses down, near the empty rental at the corner. She said she thought maybe Lauren was surprising me and did not want her own driveway camera catching it, which made no sense, so she did not say anything. Then she saw a man get out of the passenger side and walk toward the rental with Lauren. I asked if she knew the man. She said no, but he was tall, dark hair, maybe late 30s. She only saw them from the side. I asked why she was telling me now. She looked miserable and said because when she waved, Lauren saw her and immediately turned away. That detail hit harder than anything else. Not the possibility of cheating. Not the lying. The fact that my wife apparently saw our neighbor and ducked like a teenager sneaking into a party. I thanked Denise. She squeezed my arm and said she was sorry. As soon as she left, I drove to the rental house at the corner. A guy named Todd answered the door. He looked exactly like the sort of man I would hate on sight in that moment even if he had done nothing wrong. Mid to late 30s, gym build, expensive watch. Plain gray t-shirt that probably cost more than my utility bill. The kind of face that had never been told no by a mirror. I asked if Lauren was there. He frowned and said I had the wrong house. I told him I was her husband. His entire expression changed, but only for half a second. Then he smoothed it out and said, "I think you should leave." That was all I needed to hear. I do not remember everything I said next. I know I called him a liar. I know I shouted Lauren's name. I know Baxter was home barking his head off because I had left him. Todd stepped onto the porch and told me again to leave before he called the cops. I said call them. He did not. I kept yelling for maybe 15 more seconds until a woman from across the street opened her blinds. Then I got back in my car and drove away. Lauren called me 10 minutes later. The first thing she said was, "What the hell are you doing?" Not hello, not what is going on, not even denial. I pulled into a church parking lot and said, "You tell me." She was breathing hard, like she had run. Then she said, "I can explain." I said, "You are not in Nashville." She said no. I said, "You have been coming back to town." She said yes. I said, "Who is Todd?" She was quiet long enough for me to hear a turn signal clicking somewhere near her. Then she said, "It's complicated." I have never hated a phrase more. I said, "You have until I hang up to make it uncomplicated." She started crying immediately. Real crying, not sniffles. She said Todd was not what I thought. She said she had not been on a work assignment. She said she had been staying nearby because she needed space and did not know how to tell me. She said Todd was helping her. She said she had been thinking about leaving me for months and was trying to figure out what she wanted. I asked if she was sleeping with him. She said, "That's not the point." Which is apparently adult language for yes. I asked why she made up an entire fake assignment. She said because if she told me she wanted space, I would ask questions she could not answer yet. I said, "So you lied to my face, left me here waving goodbye in the driveway, and hid 20 minutes away with some guy." She started saying my name over and over like repetition could soften facts. Then she told me the part that still makes me feel sick. Todd was not new. She had met him almost a year earlier through a consulting project. They started texting, then meeting for coffee, then more. She said it never turned physical, until recently, like I was supposed to grade her on a curve. I asked if anyone else knew. She said her friend Kelly knew some of it. Kelly had stood in my kitchen 2 weeks before Lauren's assignment, drinking white wine and telling us about a terrible date she went on. I hung up after that because I thought I might drive into a tree if I kept listening. Lauren came home the next morning. She walked in carrying one suitcase and looked like she had been awake all night. I had barely slept either. I had spent half the night in the living room and half in the spare room. Every light in the house on, feeling like a stranger inside my own life. When she stepped through the front door, I saw something I had not expected. Not guilt exactly. Not relief. She looked annoyed that reality had finally forced itself into the room. I asked if she was ready to tell the truth. She said yes. Then she told me a version of the truth that somehow made everything worse. She said the fake work assignment began as a temporary separation idea. Kelly had suggested that if Lauren needed space to think, she could tell me work was sending her away instead of starting a huge emotional fight. Todd had access to the furnished rental through a friend who managed properties, and he let Lauren use it some nights when she wanted to be away from home. At first, according to her, she intended to spend time alone and figure herself out. Then she kept seeing Todd. Then it became easier to keep lying than to unravel the lie. I asked if she hurt herself. She said yes. I asked if Todd was married. She said divorced. I asked if Todd knew she was married. She said yes. I asked if her company knew anything about Nashville. She said no. I asked if she had actually been going to work. She said yes, mostly, but taking PTO here and there to keep the story going. She said she never meant for it to spiral this far. That sentence almost made me laugh. Like she slipped on a banana peel and accidentally constructed a fake interstate work assignment, complete with recycled photos and camera tampering. I asked her if she loved him. She cried harder and said she did not know. I said, "That means yes enough for me." Then she asked if we could go to counseling. That was the moment I realized counseling meant something very different to her than it did to me. To me, counseling is what you do when two people are standing in the wreckage together. To her, it felt like a parachute she wanted to put on after setting the fire. I told her I wanted her out of the house. She said legally she lived there too. And there it was, that ugly shift from marriage language to strategy language. The house is in both our names. We bought it after we got married. So yes, legally she was right. I told her then she could stay in the spare room until I talked to a lawyer. But I was done pretending we were a couple. She agreed too quickly. That should have warned me. What followed was the strangest week of my life. We lived in the same house like hostile coworkers on a business trip. She stayed in the spare room. We passed each other in the kitchen without touching. She cried sometimes. I ignored it. She tried twice to start conversations about how unhappy she had been for a long time. How emotionally alone she felt, how I would not hear her in the marriage. Maybe some of that was even true in ways I had failed to see. I am not pretending I was a perfect husband. I worked late too often. I got lazy about romance. I thought shared routines were enough proof of love. But none of that made this okay. And I refused to let her rewrite the story into I was neglected, so I invented Nashville. The more I looked, the more lies I found. There were restaurant charges in town on nights she claimed to be in Tennessee. There was a pharmacy purchase 2 miles from our house. There was a printed lease inquiry form in her tote bag for a 1-bedroom apartment in Dublin. There was a hidden album on her phone, which she had forgotten synced to our shared tablet in the living room. Full of pictures of wine glasses, takeout containers, Todd's arm, Todd's dog. Todd asleep on a couch, Todd smiling on some patio under string lights. No explicit photos, but intimate enough to leave bruises. I stopped eating much. I dropped 8 pounds in under 2 weeks. Marcus made me promise not to do anything stupid. By stupid, he meant yelling at Todd again, posting everything online, changing the locks, draining accounts, or sleeping with someone out of spite. He had gone through a divorce himself and had the emotional 1,000-yard stare of a veteran. He kept saying, act like everything you do is going to be read aloud in court. So I called a lawyer. Her name was Erin, mid-40s, direct, no nonsense, with the kind of office that smelled faintly like old coffee and printer toner. I told her everything. She interrupted only to clarify facts. Joint finances, no kids, any evidence of dissipation of marital funds, any texts admitting the affair, any proof of deception related to property. She was not shocked, which made me feel both comforted and pathetic. Erin explained that in Ohio, the affair itself mattered less legally than people think unless there was money tied up in it or extreme circumstances. Emotional devastation does not show up cleanly on a spreadsheet. She told me not to move out unless we decided strategically that it made sense. She told me to document everything, copy financial records, separate my paycheck into a new account if needed, and stop talking to Lauren about divorce details without counsel. Then she said something that stuck with me. Your wife has been planning an exit while preserving optionality. I asked what that meant. Erin said, it means she wanted to test another life without giving up this one. That was exactly it. Lauren wanted a husband-shaped safety net while auditioning a replacement. The legal advice helped, but it did not answer the emotional question that kept chewing at me. Which was why? Not why do people cheat in general? Why this? Why such a bizarre, elaborate lie? Why not ask for separation? Why not just leave? Why make me wave goodbye like an idiot in my own driveway? I got part of that answer from Kelly, of all people. I did not reach out to her. She came to me. She knocked on my door on a Thursday evening while Lauren was at work. Kelly is one of those women who always looks put together even when she is allegedly just stopping by. Perfect ponytail, white sneakers with no dirt on them, giant sunglasses even though the sun was going down. I almost did not let her in. She sat at my kitchen table and said, I owe you the truth. That was rich. Kelly admitted she knew Lauren had feelings for Todd months ago. She said she told Lauren to tell me and end things cleanly if she was serious. According to Kelly, the fake assignment was not originally her idea the way Lauren claimed. Kelly said Lauren floated it first as a joke, then started treating it like a practical plan. Kelly said she did not think Lauren would actually do it. When she realized Lauren had gone through with it, she freaked out and told her she was making a disaster. I asked why she never told me. Kelly's eyes filled with tears and she said because Lauren was her best friend and she kept hoping Lauren would come to her senses before it got this bad. I asked the question I had been circling for days. Was she planning to come back to me if Todd didn't work out? Kelly looked down. That was answer enough. But then she said it anyway. I think she didn't know what she wanted. I think she wanted time to compare lives without having to blow up her marriage first. Compare lives. Like she was test driving used SUVs. Kelly also told me something else. Todd had recently started pushing Lauren to make a decision because he was tired of sneaking around. So whatever fantasy bubble they were in, it had already started cracking. I thanked Kelly for coming, though I am not sure I meant it. After she left, I sat at the table for a long time staring at the grain in the wood until Baxter nudged my knee. That night Lauren came home and knew immediately Kelly had been there. I do not know how. Maybe she saw the coffee mug in the sink. Maybe Kelly told her. Lauren asked what Kelly said. I told her enough. Lauren got angry in a way that almost impressed me. She said Kelly had no right to involve herself. I just looked at her and said, do you hear yourself? Lauren started crying again and said everyone was turning her into a monster. I said, you did not need anyone's help with that. That was the meanest thing I said through all of this and I do not regret it. 2 days later things escalated. I got home from work early because a meeting was cancelled. Lauren's car was in the driveway. I walked inside and heard her talking in the spare room, voice low and urgent. I did not mean to eavesdrop, but then I heard my name. She was on speaker with Todd. He was saying, "You need to stop dragging this out." Lauren said, "I know." Todd said, "Then tell him about the apartment." Lauren said, "I'm handling it." I stood frozen in the hallway. Todd said, "No, you're not. You're still sleeping in his house every night." Lauren snapped, "Because I can't just vanish, Todd." He said, "You already did once." Then there was silence long enough that I think both of them sensed something. I opened the door. Lauren looked like she had seen a ghost. Todd's voice came through the phone, "Lauren." I said, "Put it back on speaker." She did not move. I walked over, picked up the phone, and said, "Todd, if you ever call my house again, I'm forwarding everything to my attorney." He actually had the nerve to say, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I laughed in his ear and hung up. Lauren started saying I had no right to grab her phone. I asked if she had signed a lease. She said no. I asked if she was planning to move in with him. She said she had looked at an apartment but had not decided. I asked if there was anything left in this marriage that was not a lie or a backup plan. She had no answer. That weekend my sister Melissa came into town. Melissa is older than me by 5 years and has the energy of someone who could fistfight fate in a parking lot and win. I had not told my family the details yet because I was embarrassed. Which in retrospect is insane because I did not do anything wrong. Lauren had already spoken to her parents by then. I do not know what version she gave them, but judging by the texts her mother sent me about marital difficulties, it was a carefully edited one. Melissa came in, hugged me so hard my ribs hurt, and immediately asked where Lauren was. I said out with a friend. Melissa said, "Good, because I would say something unchristian." For 2 days Melissa helped me do practical things I should have done sooner. She sat with me while I copied financial statements and mortgage documents. She helped me inventory furniture and valuables just in case. She made me eat actual food. She walked Baxter. She cleaned the kitchen because apparently betrayal still leaves dirty dishes. At one point I asked if I was being cold. If maybe I should at least hear Lauren out more fully before filing. Melissa looked at me like I had asked whether I should pet a lit stove. Then she said, "She did not tell one lie, Evan. She built an entire fake city." That sentence snapped something into place for me. Because that was the heart of it. If Lauren had confessed to a one-night mistake, or even an affair, I would still have been devastated. But this was different. This was sustained performance. Logistics. Coordination. Props. A fake work storyline. Photos saved for future use. Camera manipulation. My wife had not just betrayed me. She had managed me. Monday morning I told Aaron to file. When I got home that evening, Lauren was sitting at the kitchen table like she had been waiting. She asked if we could talk before I did anything drastic. I sat down because I wanted to hear what drastic meant to the person who staged her own fake corporate exile. She said she had ended things with Todd. I said okay. She looked confused by my lack of reaction. She said she realized she was blowing up her life for someone she did not even fully trust. She said the secrecy and pressure had made everything feel distorted. She said she knew now that what she really wanted was to repair our marriage if I would give her the chance. I asked when this revelation hit her. She said after our fight and after talking to Kelly and her mom. I asked if it also had anything to do with Todd pushing her to move out for real. Lauren stared at me. That was another answer. I told her I had already talked to a lawyer. That was the first moment she looked truly scared. She asked if I was filing for divorce. I said yes. She said I was making a huge decision while emotional. I said that was ironic coming from someone who rented herself a second life. She started crying again, then switched tactics and said divorce would be messy and expensive and we could still work this out privately. I said maybe she should have thought about messy before manufacturing Nashville. Then she said the thing that ended any remaining softness in me. She said, "I never meant to hurt you this much. Not I'm sorry, not I was selfish, not I lied because I was cowardly. Just that she had miscalculated the size of the wound." I told her intent did not matter to the person bleeding. The next few weeks were brutal in a quieter, more technical way. Lawyers, financial disclosures, family members calling, Lauren's dad phoning me to say he was not excusing her behavior but asking me to show grace. My own mother crying on speakerphone. Denise pretending not to watch but absolutely watching every car that came and went. Baxter getting anxious because the house felt tense all the time. Lauren moved into a short-term apartment after being served. Not with Todd, as far as I know. That relationship apparently collapsed under the strain of becoming real. Funny how affairs love shadows until the electric bill shows up. She kept trying to reach out. Long texts, memory-heavy emails. One voicemail where she said no matter what happened, she hoped I knew I mattered to her and our marriage mattered. I never responded beyond what was necessary for logistics. I found out through Marcus, who heard it from a mutual friend in Lauren's office, that there had never been any chance of her being sent to Nashville because her company did not even have a regional office there. She had picked a city that sounded reasonable and far enough to discourage weekend visits. That detail broke something in me all over again, not because it changed the facts, but because it showed how deliberate the fiction was. She had not borrowed a real work possibility and twisted it. She invented the whole thing from scratch. A month into the process, I ran into Todd once at a grocery store. I almost wish I had not because the reality was so pathetic compared to the idea. He looked tired, thinner, less polished. He saw me, froze, and then actually tried to say, "Man, I'm sorry." I laughed and kept walking. There is nothing someone like that can say to me that has value. He knew she was married. He knew enough to hide. His regret only arrived when hiding stopped being convenient. The hardest part of all this has not even been the anger. It has been the humiliation. Knowing people were in on parts of it. Knowing my neighbor saw more of my marriage than I did. Knowing I kissed my wife goodbye for a fake business trip while she was probably already planning which nights to spend in a rental with another man. Knowing she came and went from my own neighborhood like I was a guard dog she could distract with a schedule. I also keep getting stuck on tiny details that should not matter. The way she packed real luggage. The way she complained about fake traffic. The way she asked me which apartment screenshot looked less depressing. The fact that I told her to drive safe. A lot of people say betrayal destroys trust. That is true, but it also destroys chronology. I no longer know which memories are real in the way I thought they were. I keep re-examining the previous year like an archaeologist looking for the first crack in a wall. Was she already texting him on our anniversary? Was she already comparing me to him when we were picking out patio lights? When she laughed at my stupid joke in bed last winter, was that real laughter or habit? I do not know what to do with a past that keeps changing shape every time I touch it. And here's where I need advice, because this is the part still making me crazy. Lauren has now shifted hard into remorse mode. She says she was having some kind of emotional collapse. She says she compartmentalized and dissociated. She says she felt trapped by her own choices and kept doubling down because she was ashamed. She says she knows how insane it sounds. Her mother has apparently told her she needs therapy immediately. Kelly texted me once, just once, saying Lauren is not okay and is spiraling now that the fantasy has collapsed. Part of me does not care. Part of me thinks good. Part of me still feels sick when I imagine the person I loved unraveling. Even though she is the one who detonated this, I do not want her back. I know that, but I also do not know how hard to go in the divorce. Aaron says I am entitled to protect myself fully. Marcus says be fair but not generous. Melissa says salt the earth, which is why she is not my lawyer. I have evidence, a lot of it, metadata, camera logs, admissions, the fake story, financial records showing money spent on the affair. Nothing wild, but enough to establish the pattern. Lauren has hinted through her attorney that she wants a respectful and private resolution, and would prefer we avoid introducing personally embarrassing narratives, where possible. That phrase made my blood boil. Personally embarrassing narratives, like my marriage is a press issue. So I guess my question is, what should I do with that? Not legally, because I have counsel. More morally and practically. Do I agree to a cleaner, quieter divorce if the financial terms are fair? Just to get this over with. Do I press every factual detail into the record because she built this whole thing on deception and deserves no shielding? Do I owe any kindness to someone who treated me like a fallback plan? If I refuse to protect her dignity now, am I just becoming ugly too? If I do protect it, am I helping her escape the weight of what she did? I keep thinking about that morning in the driveway. Lauren smiled, kissed me, adjusted her coat, and told me 3 months would suck. Maybe that is the image I cannot move past because it contains the whole problem in one frame. She was tender and false at the same time. I did not know those things could occupy the same face. If you have read all of this, thank you. I know it is long. I know it sounds ridiculous, like something written for the internet instead of lived in real life. I wish that were true. I wish I were making this up because the alternative is that someone I trusted enough to build a home with created a fake city so she could try out another life and still keep me on a shelf in case she changed her mind. I have not forgiven her. I do not think I will. I have not decided how much grace looks like cowardice and how much justice looks like revenge. Right now I am sleeping better than I was a month ago, eating a little more. Walking Baxter every night, and trying to remember that being deceived does not make me stupid. It makes me deceived. Still, every time I hear a car slow down outside my house after dark, my first stupid thought is that Lauren is back from Nashville. Story number 4. My mother-in-law has never liked me. But for most of my marriage she has been smart enough to hide it behind casseroles, smiley face emojis, and those tiny little comments that are somehow meaner because they are said in a sweet voice. I am 34, my husband Brett is 36, and we have been married for 9 years. We live outside St. Louis in a suburb full of beige houses, fenced backyards, and dads who spend too much money on smokers they use 4 times a year. We have one son, Mason, who is 7 and has never once in his life kept a thought inside his own head. If he notices something, he says it. If he overhears something, he repeats it. If you tell him not to mention something, that pretty much guarantees it is coming out at the worst possible moment. That detail matters. Brett's family is one of those families that acts casual but is weirdly obsessed with hierarchy. Not rich, but comfortable in a very polished, old suburban way. Country club Christmas brunch, monogrammed stockings. Everyone in coordinated neutrals for family photos. The kind of people who say things like, "We just value tradition," when what they really mean is, "We like control." My mother-in-law, Diane, is 63 and has built her entire personality around being the keeper of the family image. Her Facebook is just vacations, holiday tables, and captions about gratitude. If you looked at it from the outside, you would think she had the warmest family in America. In reality, she keeps score on everything. Who hosts? Who brings what? Who sends thank you notes fast enough? Who wears jeans to Easter? Who married? Well, I was never her idea of who Brett should have married. I'm from a normal middle-class family in Illinois. My dad was a mechanic, my mom taught 2nd grade. And we were the kind of family who ate dinner at the kitchen table in sweatshirts and argued over who forgot to buy ranch. I work as a contracts coordinator for a medical supply company, which sounds boring because it is. Brett is a project manager for a commercial roofing company. We met in our 20s at a mutual friend's apartment party in Columbia, Missouri. It was not glamorous. There were warm beers in a plastic tub and somebody's roommate kept trying to play acoustic Jack Johnson covers in the living room. We hit it off anyway. Diane's issue with me was never one dramatic thing. It was death by 1,000 little cuts. She would buy me clothes 2 sizes too big and say she thought I liked looser fits. She would ask if I needed help setting a proper holiday table as if forks were a complex science. She once told me, at my own baby shower, that I seemed surprisingly calm for someone without much experience around children. Which was funny because I had spent half my teens helping raise my younger brother while she was apparently busy picking out mirrored serving trays. Brett always called her comments just how mom is, which I know is a sentence that makes half of Reddit want to throw a chair. But back then it felt survivable. He loved me, he backed me up sometimes. He also hated conflict, especially with his mom. He grew up with Diane managing everyone's emotions by making any disagreement feel like a betrayal. So he learned early that the easiest path was to smooth things over, not confront them. For years, I let a lot go because I loved my husband and because I honestly thought Diane's problem with me was mostly social. I wasn't polished enough. I said exactly what I meant too often. I didn't treat her opinions like commandments. Annoying, yes. Manageable, also yes. Then Brett's grandfather died last fall, and the family got weird in a way that made all the old passive-aggressive nonsense look almost quaint. His grandfather, Walter, had a lake property near Lake of the Ozarks that had been in the family since the late 70s. Not a giant estate, nothing like that. It was a good-sized cedar house on a bluff with a dock, 2 patched-up fishing boats, a screened porch with mismatched rocking chairs, and a garage that always smelled like gasoline and sunscreen. Every summer, Brett's family did at least one full reunion there. Parents, siblings, cousins, spouses, kids. Hot dogs on the grill, little kids in puddle jumpers. The adults drinking canned cocktails and pretending nobody was still mad about whatever happened the previous Thanksgiving. Walter adored that place, and he also adored Brett. Brett was the oldest grandson and spent more time there than anyone growing up. When we were first married, he used to get this whole different look on his face when we drove down there. Like the version of himself that existed before deadlines and mortgage payments got to come back. For a weekend, our son Mason loved it too. He learned to fish off that dock before he learned to ride a bike. Walter liked me, which I think quietly irritated Diane. He used to say I was the only one in the family who read documents before signing them. He was half joking, but only half. A few years back he got pressured into some overpriced dock repair contract and I was the one who caught a ridiculous clause buried in the middle. After that he made a whole show of handing me things and saying, "Let Natalie look, she's the only one with eyes." That became a running family joke, except with Diane it never sounded like a joke. More like a criticism wrapped in one. When Walter died at 86, everyone acted devastated, which was real. But underneath that was a layer of immediate tension about the lake house. Not even because anyone was necessarily greedy at first. More because family property makes people insane. Suddenly every memory has a dollar sign attached to it and every sibling starts hearing the word fair, in a different tone. Walter had 3 children, Diane, her younger brother Gary, and her sister Paula. There had been some sort of trust set up years ago that nobody really talked about openly. Which should have been the first warning sign. After the funeral, Diane kept saying things like, "Dad wanted the property to stay in the family. And, we all have to make sacrifices to preserve his vision." Which sounds noble until you realize the person saying it usually means other people's sacrifices. A few months after the funeral, I started noticing more little comments. Diane asking Brett whether he had thought about the future of the property. Diane saying my practical approach might not understand family sentiment. Diane telling Mason that one day the cabin might be Aunt Rachel's project. Rachel is Brett's younger sister, 40, divorced, no kids, and absolutely Diane's favorite. Rachel sells luxury real estate in Kansas City and has a habit of talking about investments, even when people are just trying to eat potato salad. At Christmas, Rachel spent 20 minutes describing how the lake area was booming and how vacation rentals there were printing money. I remember looking at Brett across the room because the way she said it made my skin itch. Like she wasn't talking about Grandpa's place where all the cousins learned to swim. She was talking about a distressed asset. Brett brushed it off. Then spring rolled around, and Diane announced that the annual family reunion would be the first weekend in June. Same as always, usually there would be a giant group text with cabin assignments. Who was bringing breakfast casseroles, who had sunscreen, whether the pontoon still needed a battery, all that. This year, the text never really happened. Diane called Brett directly. He took the call in our kitchen while I was packing Mason's lunch for school the next day. I wasn't eavesdropping. Diane is just one of those women who talks loud enough on speakerphone that privacy becomes theoretical. At first it sounded normal. Then Brett got quiet in that way he does when he's uncomfortable. After he hung up, I asked what that was about. He said, "Mom just thinks this year might be a little smaller." I asked what that meant. He rubbed the back of his neck and said, "She said with everything after Grandpa. Emotions are still high, space is tight, and they want to keep it mostly immediate family." I actually laughed because I thought he meant maybe some cousins weren't invited. Then I said, "I am immediate family." He didn't answer right away. That was when the laugh died. I asked him if Diane had actually said I wasn't invited. He said, "She said maybe it would be better if just I took Mason this year." I stared at him. So yes. He started doing that thing where he tries to soften the sharp edges of a situation by talking longer, which only makes it more insulting. He said Diane probably just meant because I've had a stressful year at work. And because the sleeping arrangements were weird, and because Rachel's bringing her new boyfriend. And because Paula's side was coming in later than usual. And maybe his mom thought fewer people would mean fewer logistics. I said, "Have spouses ever not been invited before?" He said no. I said, "Are Gary's wife and Paula's husband still going?" He said he thought so. I just looked at him. Brett hates silence, so he kept filling it. He said he didn't agree with the way Diane phrased it. He said he told her it was awkward. He said she insisted she was trying to reduce tension. I asked what tension. He said maybe because there had been some disagreements about the property and his mom didn't want a big emotional weekend. That made even less sense because I was not the one having open arguments about the property. Rachel and Gary had already sniped at each other twice in family group chats over maintenance expenses and usage priorities. I had not said a word beyond asking Brett, privately, whether he had seen a copy of the trust paperwork. That question alone had apparently branded me dangerous. I told Brett that if his mother didn't want me there, he could make whatever choice he wanted. But I was not going to pretend I was busy or tired or okay with it. I said if he went anyway after letting her exclude me from a family event I have attended for nearly a decade, that was a choice. And he needed to be honest with himself about what he was choosing. He got defensive immediately, which is what he does when he knows I'm right but wishes I were quieter about it. He said he didn't want Mason to miss seeing his cousins. He said maybe this was a one-time weird year because everyone was grieving. He said if he made it a standoff, it would become an even bigger family mess. I said, your mother already made it a family mess. For about 2 days, we barely talked beyond school pickups and who was buying more paper towels. Then Diane texted me directly, which almost never happened unless it was a birthday. Her text said, "Hi Natalie. I hope Brett explained that this year's lake weekend is going to be very small and very emotional for everyone after losing Walter. I just think it may be best to keep things to blood family and children this time so everyone can process privately. I know you'll understand." That phrase, blood family, made my entire body go hot. It was one of those texts designed to be deniable. No curse words, no obvious insult, just enough cruelty tucked into a smile to make you sound dramatic if you object. I showed it to Brett. He looked sick, which I appreciated, but not as much as I would have appreciated him calling her immediately. Instead he said, "I'll talk to her." I said, "What does that even mean? You either tell her I go too or none of you go, or you're accepting this." He asked if I really wanted Mason to miss it over Mom being difficult. I said, "Your mom is not being difficult. She is telling your wife she is not family. And this is the part one I'm still mad at myself about. I didn't force the issue all the way. I was so exhausted by the argument. And Mason had already been talking for weeks about fishing with his cousins and sleeping in the bunk room and eating Grandpa's favorite blueberry pancakes on the porch. I couldn't stand the idea of him feeling caught in the middle. So I said fine, Brett could take him for the weekend, but I was not covering for Diane. If anyone asked why I wasn't there, Brett could tell the truth. He said okay, but he said it in that weak way that made me know he probably wouldn't. The week before they left, Diane got strangely interested in my schedule. She asked Brett if I was still working from home that Friday. She asked whether I had plans with my own family. She asked if I might use the quiet weekend to rest and recharge. At one point she even asked if I still read contracts for work or if I had moved into more administrative things now. That one stuck with me because it was so specific and so random that it wasn't random at all. I asked Brett what exactly had been discussed about the property lately, and he said not much. Just vague family stuff. Rachel thought it needed expensive updates. Gary didn't want to pour money into it. Paula didn't want it sold but didn't want the responsibility either. Same old disagreement, according to him. I asked if there was paperwork involved. He said, Mom mentioned maybe simplifying ownership down the line, but nothing official. I told him that if anyone put papers in front of him at that reunion, he was not signing a single thing without bringing it home first. He laughed like I was overreacting. I said, I'm serious. He said, Natalie, I'm not an idiot. I wish he had been an idiot. It would have made what happened next less personal. They left Friday morning. Mason was vibrating with excitement, carrying a Spider-Man backpack and a fishing pole like he was leaving for military deployment. Brett kissed me goodbye in the driveway and told me not to stew all weekend. I told him I was not stewing, I was remembering. He made a face like I was being dramatic, loaded the truck, and left. The first day was quiet in a way I weirdly hated. I cleaned out the pantry, answered emails, and kept checking my phone even though I didn't want to. Brett sent a picture of Mason holding a bluegill on the dock. He sent one of the lake at sunset. In every photo, I could feel my absence. That night I FaceTimed Mason before bed. He was sunburned across the nose, sticky looking, and extremely happy. He told me about tubing, about how cousin Emma threw up off the side of the boat, about how grandma let everyone eat ice cream before dinner because it's reunion rules. Then Diane's voice came from somewhere behind him saying, okay buddy, 2 more minutes. It was such a normal little sentence, but I wanted to throw my phone into the yard. Saturday afternoon, Brett barely texted. When I asked if everything was okay, he replied hours later, busy day. Talk tonight. He never called that night. Around 10:30 he texted that everyone had stayed up too late and Mason crashed. Sunday afternoon they got home. Mason came through the front door like a tornado, smelling like lake water and sunscreen and those gummy worms Diane always buys in the weirdly giant bag from Sam's Club. He was talking so fast I only caught every third word. Brett looked tired, like more than lake tired. Not relaxed, tight. I clocked that immediately. But I let Mason go first because 7-year-olds do not care about adult dread. He dumped his duffel bag in the middle of the living room and started pulling out treasures. A cheap souvenir t-shirt, a smooth skipping rock, a bracelet one cousin made out of fishing line, a paper plate with a half-finished crayon drawing of the dock. Then he pulled out a little envelope with a cartoon fish on the front. He said, Grandma said not to lose this because it was from the big family meeting after Dad signed. Quote, I looked up at Brett. Brett said, too quickly, buddy, why don't you go wash up? Mason ignored him because again, he is 7. He opened the envelope and dumped out $100 bill and 2 20s. Grandma gave all the kids lake money because she was in a good mood after Aunt Rachel got what she wanted. The room went completely still. I asked, very calmly, what did Aunt Rachel get? Mason shrugged. The cabin thing. Brett said, Mason, upstairs. Now, that should have ended it, but Mason had one more bullet to fire without even realizing it. He looked at me and said, Grandma said not to tell you about the papers because you read everything and make people nervous. I genuinely think I stopped breathing for a second. Mason, blessedly unaware, added, but Dad signed fast anyway, so it was okay. Then he ran upstairs with his lake bag bumping against his leg. I turned to Brett and said, what papers? He started with, it's not what you think. Which is a phrase nobody has ever said right before a harmless explanation. I asked again. He said they had a family discussion Saturday morning about the future of the property. Diane, Rachel, Gary, Paula, everyone. Rachel had been working with some lawyer friend on a way to streamline decision-making, so the place wouldn't get tied up forever in shared ownership. The argument, according to Brett, was that too many names on the title would make maintenance, taxes, insurance, and any future decisions impossible. Rachel wanted to create an LLC that would hold the property. And everyone with an interest would contribute their share to it so management could be easier. I said, and you signed something. He said, it was just a preliminary consent. I asked where it was. He said Rachel had it. I asked why, if it was so harmless. I was not told about any of this beforehand. He rubbed his face and said because he knew I would freak out. I laughed, not because it was funny. Because I could feel myself slipping into that weird, cold anger where everything gets too sharp. I said, I would not freak out. I would read it. He said, Natalie, they were all there. It wasn't some scheme. I said, your 7-year-old just told me your mother specifically said not to tell me because I read things and make people nervous. He said Mason probably misunderstood. I said, did he also misunderstand, after Dad signed, and, after Aunt Rachel got what she wanted? Brett sat down at the kitchen table and put his head in his hands. That was when I knew it was bad. I asked him, one more time, what exactly he signed. He finally admitted he had not really read all of it. Rachel had summarized it. Diane had said everyone was on board and that they needed to move quickly before tax issues got messy. Gary and Paula had apparently signed similar documents. Brett said he felt put on the spot in front of everyone and didn't want to derail the whole weekend. He said it seemed like a formality because the cabin was staying in the family. I just stared at him. Then I asked the question that mattered most. Did you sign away something you inherited? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I told him to call Rachel right then and get a copy. He hesitated. I told him if he didn't, I would. So he called. Rachel answered on the second ring and sounded way too cheerful for a person who had just helped corner her brother into signing family property documents at a reunion his wife was excluded from. Brett asked her to send him whatever he signed. She got quiet for a second, then said, why? I took the phone from him and said, because I asked. She laughed that little dry laugh she does when she wants you to feel provincial. Then she said, this is exactly why Mom thought it was best not to make the weekend combative. I said, send the documents, Rachel. She said, it's handled. I said, not if it includes my husband's legal interest in inherited property and he signed without independent review. The line went silent. Then Rachel said, you always have to make everything adversarial. I said, send the documents. She hung up. Brett looked miserable. I felt like I was going to come out of my own skin. About 20 minutes later, an email came through from Rachel with 3 PDF attachments and no message. I opened the first one and felt my stomach drop so hard it actually hurt. It was not a preliminary consent. It was an assignment of interest. Rachel had formed an LLC 2 weeks earlier called Ozark Cedar Holdings, LLC. The documents transferred individual ownership interests tied to Walter's trust distribution into the LLC in exchange for membership units. That part by itself might have been workable in some universe if it had been transparent and equally structured, but it was not. The operating agreement named Rachel as managing member with sole authority over maintenance decisions, booking decisions, improvement decisions, financing decisions, and sale recommendations. The voting structure was also weighted by capital contribution. And somehow Rachel's supposed contribution included management services, valued at a number that gave her majority control without her putting in equivalent cash. Buried farther down was a clause allowing the managing member to force a sale of minority interests under certain circumstances if additional capital calls were not met. In plain English, Brett had effectively signed his inherited share into a structure controlled by Rachel, who could later squeeze out anyone who could not keep up with whatever financial demands she decided to impose. And that was before I got to the attachment that made it crystal clear this whole thing had been brewing for a while. A real estate market packet, comparable luxury rental rates, projected seasonal income after renovation. They were planning to turn Grandpa's cabin into a high-end vacation rental. I sat there reading while Brett hovered next to me, and I could feel him realizing the size of what he had done in real time. He kept saying, "Rachel said it was just for management." I said, "Rachel lies." He said, "Mom said Gary and Paula understood it." I said, "Then either they're lying too, or they're idiots, or both." I was so angry I almost couldn't speak, which for me is rare. What made it worse was that this wasn't just about money. It was about how deliberate the setup had been. They excluded me. They made sure Mason came because kids make everything look wholesome. They staged this family weekend and slid legal paperwork into the middle of it, knowing the one person in the family who would actually read it was not there. And my husband let them. I wish I could say I handled the next part with grace. I did not. I called Diane. She answered like she had been expecting it. "Hi, Natalie." That alone made me see red. I said, "You told my husband I wasn't welcome at the reunion because I would read the documents before he signed them." She gave this little offended sigh and said, "That is not what I said." I said, "Then tell me what you said." She replied, "I said you have a tendency to make things adversarial and your energy would have made a sensitive family conversation more difficult." I said, "You mean I would have asked questions?" She said, "You are not Walter's child." That sentence landed like a slap. Then she kept going, calm as ever. She said this was a family property issue, not a marriage issue. She said spouses did not need to insert themselves into every matter. She said the siblings were trying to preserve something meaningful and I had always approached it like a transaction. I actually laughed at that, because the irony was so obscene. Rachel literally had rental projections attached and Diane wanted to tell me I was the one making it transactional. I said, "You excluded me from a family reunion so you could pressure your son into signing legal documents without review." She said, "Brett is a grown man." I said, "Then why did you need me gone?" Silence. Then, in the most revealing moment of the entire conversation, she said, "Because ever since you married him, he doesn't know how to make decisions without running them through you first." There it was. Not grief, not family unity, not preserving Walter's memory. Control. Diane did not hate me because I was rude or difficult or not polished enough. She hated me because I interrupted her access to Brett. I told her the documents were not valid as far as I was concerned until they were reviewed by counsel. She said I was overreacting. I said if Rachel or anyone else recorded or relied on those papers before we had legal review, things were about to get very unpleasant. Then I hung up before I said anything I would regret. Brett stood in the kitchen looking like someone had poured a bucket of cold water over him. He said, quietly, "She actually said that." I said, "Yes." Then I asked him the question I had been holding back because I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "Did you know that was the reason I wasn't invited?" He said no immediately. Then, after a second, he said, "Not exactly." That almost made it worse. He admitted Diane had made comments before the trip about me being hostile to any plan involving the cabin. Rachel had joked that if I came, they would need a conference room and a notary. Brett said he thought they were teasing. He said once the discussion started at the lake house, it became obvious they had all talked before and he had walked into something already in motion. He said by then, with everyone looking at him and his mom acting like he was the last obstacle to keeping peace, he folded. I asked if he defended me when they said I made people nervous. He didn't answer. That silence did more damage than the document. The next morning, I called an attorney my company uses for outside contract disputes and asked for a referral to someone who handled estate and property matters. By noon, I was sitting in a conference room in Clayton with a woman named Marissa who wore navy scrubs under a blazer because she had apparently come straight from family court on some other case and had no patience for decorative nonsense. She read the papers, asked a lot of targeted questions, and said the phrase I needed to hear. "This has pressure all over it." She said whether it could be unwound would depend on the trust terms, the nature of the original distribution, whether full disclosures had been made, whether consideration was real, and whether Brett had independent access to counsel. She also said if Diane and Rachel intentionally excluded the spouse most likely to review it in order to create a smoother signing environment, that would not look great if things got contested. Brett came to that meeting, and I watched him hear an actual attorney say, in professional language, that his family had manipulated him. I think part of him had still been clinging to the idea that this was just a misunderstanding with sharp edges. Marissa removed that comfort. Things blew up after that. Gary, who had apparently not read much either, started panicking once he realized Rachel's LLC structure gave her majority control. Paula got furious because she had thought the whole point was to avoid selling, not create a path that made sale easier under one manager. Rachel started insisting everyone had the same paperwork and nobody was forced to do anything. Diane began calling people one by one, trying to frame me as the outsider stirring up legal drama. That part almost worked for about 24 hours because families like Brett's are deeply invested in not naming the real problem. If one person tells the truth too clearly, that person becomes the disturbance. It is easier for them to be mad at the truth teller than at the person who created the mess. Then my son, once again, accidentally made things worse in the most honest possible way. Paula called our house on speaker one evening because she wanted to talk to Brett. Mason was sitting at the counter doing math homework and coloring the word problem people blew for some reason. Paula asked how the weekend really went from his perspective because she was getting 5 different stories from 5 different adults. Before Brett could answer, Mason looked up and said, "Grandma said Mommy couldn't come because Aunt Rachel didn't want the paper argument lady there." The silence on that call was unbelievable. Then Paula said, very softly, she said that in front of Mason. Mason nodded and went back to coloring like he had not just detonated a grenade. Brett put his hand over his eyes. That was the moment, I think, when the family split internally. Because excluding me was one thing. Using a little kid as background furniture while trashing his mom and pushing legal papers was another. Paula lost it on Diane after that. Gary's wife, Melissa, who had mostly stayed out of everything, started asking very direct questions in the group thread. Rachel got defensive and nasty. Diane went full martyr. Brett and I had some of the hardest conversations of our marriage that week. I was furious, yes, but I was also hurt in a quieter way that I don't think he understood at first. He kept focusing on the document, on the property, on the fact that he signed something stupid. I kept trying to explain that the deeper wound was that his mother could ban me from a family event. And he still packed the truck. He still put Mason in the car seat. He still drove away knowing I had been deliberately pushed outside the circle. Even if there had been no papers at all, that part was a betrayal. He cried, which is not common for him. He said he felt ashamed every time he replayed the weekend. He said once he got there, he knew it was wrong. He said Diane kept saying things like, "See how calm this is without extra tension," and "This is why I want a just family." He said he knew exactly what she meant, and he hated himself for not grabbing Mason and leaving. But he also said he has spent his whole life being trained to think his mother's disapproval was an emergency, and in that house, at that lake, with everyone looking at him, he slipped right back into being 12 years old. That explanation did not erase anything, but it did feel true. We started marriage counseling 2 weeks later, which probably sounds too neat, but it was not neat. It was humiliating and painful and full of me saying things I had swallowed for years. Like how often I had been expected to absorb his mother's behavior so he could stay comfortable. Like how many times, "That's just Mom," really meant, "Please carry the emotional cost so I don't have to." Like how lonely it felt to be the only person in the room naming what was happening. As for Diane, she stopped pretending with me after that. At first she tried her usual sweet-toned approach. She texted that she was heartbroken, the weekend had been so misunderstood. She said no mother should be punished for trying to preserve family harmony after a patriarch's death. She said it was never her intention to make me feel excluded. Then, when that did not work, she got sharper. She sent Brett a long email about how wives come and go but blood remains. She actually wrote that, not to me, to her son, whose wife she wanted gone just long enough to get papers signed. Brett showed it to me without my asking, which was the first time in years he did not try to manage my reaction before giving me the truth. He called her after reading it and, for once, did not soften anything. I heard his side from the living room. He told her I was his family. He told her she did not get to treat his wife like an outsider and still expect access to our son. Like nothing happened. He told her until she could admit what she did, there would be no visits and no family events with us. I did not hear what she said back, but I heard his voice crack when he replied, "No, Mom, Natalie did not turn me against you. You did that." I wish that moment fixed everything. It did not. Real life is messier. We are still dealing with the property issue. The attorney sent notices. Brett formally challenged the assignment. Gary is now pretending he had concerns from the beginning, which is a lie. And Paula alternates between apologizing to me and unloading family gossip I do not want. Rachel posted a passive-aggressive quote on Instagram about boundaries in people who weaponize legal threats instead of trust. Which would have been funny if I weren't so tired. Mason, for his part, mostly just knows grandma was mean to mommy and everyone is being weird about the cabin. We have had to be careful about what gets said around him. Which is infuriating considering Diane clearly did not bother with that at all. The thing that keeps replaying in my head is not even the document anymore. It is the way Diane phrased her original text. Keep it to blood family and children this time. She really thought those categories made sense. Like I was outside one circle and my son was inside another. Like she could cut me out and still claim him. Like marriage was this removable add-on unless it served her. And maybe the part that hurts most is that she would have gotten away with it longer if Mason had not innocently repeated what he heard. If he had not said one simple, honest sentence in our kitchen, I probably would have just gone on thinking Diane was cruel in a vague emotional way, not calculating in a concrete one. Brett might have kept insisting it was all badly handled but basically harmless. Rachel might already have control of that cabin without anyone noticing until much later. Instead, the whole thing cracked open because a 7-year-old does not understand adult strategies and has no interest in protecting them. I do not know what the long-term outcome is yet. I know I have not spoken to Diane directly since that phone call. I know Brett is trying harder than I have ever seen him try. But rebuilding trust inside a marriage after something like this is not fast. I know the lake house that used to feel like summer now just feels contaminated. And I know this much for sure. I was never excluded because they wanted a quiet reunion. I was excluded because they knew exactly what I would do if I were in the room. I would have read every page. I would have asked every question. I would have made them say the ugly part out loud. That was the real reason I wasn't welcome. Story number 5. The baby monitor kept turning off every night when I checked the security footage. I packed a bag immediately. The first few nights, I didn't think much of it. You know how it is with new tech. Sometimes it glitches, sometimes the Wi-Fi stutters. Sometimes you just didn't plug it in right. Our son, Leo, had just turned 1. And we were still in that phase where every little blip felt like a potential disaster. So when the baby monitor screen would go black at around 2 in the morning, I'd just roll over, nudge my husband, Jason, and mumble something about resetting the router in the morning. But it kept happening, every single night for about a week. I'd wake up with that sudden, gut punch alertness that only parents of young children know, the kind where your body knows something is wrong before your brain does. I'd fumble for my phone on the nightstand, pull up the baby monitor app, and see the little spinning wheel of death. No signal. Then, after a few minutes of me staring into the darkness of our bedroom, it would flicker back to life. I'd see Leo's crib, his little star-shaped nightlight, his peaceful sleeping form. And I'd let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Jason would sleep through it all. He's a heavy sleeper, always has been. He works long hours as a project manager for a construction firm in Denver. So by the time his head hits the pillow, he's out cold. I'm a freelance graphic designer, so I'm the one who handles the nighttime wake-ups. It's a system we've settled into, one I'm mostly okay with. Mostly. It was the 6th night when the unease really started to crystallize into something sharper. Something that felt like fear. I'd just finished a late-night deadline for a client, a logo for some new coffee shop in Loudoun. And I was exhausted. I crawled into bed around 1:30 a.m., the house silent except for the hum of the furnace. Jason was on his side, a mountain of blankets. I checked the monitor. Leo was fine, his little chest rising and falling in the fuzzy green glow of the night vision. I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, it was 2:17 a.m. and I was wide awake again. The monitor was black, just that horrible, empty black. I reached for it, my heart starting to pound a little faster. I tapped the screen, trying to wake it up. Nothing. I opened the app on my phone. No signal. My first thought was the power. Maybe the plug in Leo's room had come loose. I swung my legs out of bed, the cold hardwood floor sending a jolt through me. I padded down the hall to his room, my eyes adjusting to the dark. The door was slightly ajar, just as we always left it. I pushed it open gently. There he was, safe and sound, his little hand clutching the ear of his stuffed bunny. But my eyes weren't on him. They were on the baby monitor camera, perched on the bookcase across from his crib. The little red light that usually glowed steadily was off. Completely off. That wasn't a Wi-Fi issue. That meant the camera itself was off. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I checked the plug. It was firmly in the socket. The power strip it was plugged into was on. So why was it off? A weird thought popped into my head, one I immediately dismissed as paranoid. Did I turn it off in my sleep? No, that was stupid. I was exhausted, but I wasn't sleepwalking. The next day, I mentioned it to Jason over breakfast. He was scrolling through his phone, half listening. The monitor keeps cutting out at night, I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Like, completely off. The camera isn't even on. Probably a faulty unit, he said, not looking up from his screen. I'll order a new one tonight. A better one. That cheap thing was always a piece of crap. It was the top-rated one on Amazon, I said, a little defensive. And it's not the signal. The power light on the camera turns off. He finally looked up, a slight frown on his face. Weird, but it's probably just a short. I'll take a look at it when I get home. Okay, I said, but the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to rely on the monitor alone. I remembered we had an old security camera, a Wise Cam. That Jason had bought a while back to keep an eye on our driveway. It was just sitting in a drawer in the office. I found it, set it up on the bookshelf in our bedroom. Pointing it directly at the baby monitor screen, I wanted to see what was happening when the screen went black. Was it just a random glitch? Or was something else going on? I didn't tell Jason. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid he'd think I was being hysterical, another classic case of a new mom's anxiety. Or maybe, deep down, I knew something was wrong and I wanted to see it with my own eyes before I said anything. The first night with the Wise Cam, nothing happened. The monitor was flawless. Leo slept through, I slept through, and the world was normal. The second night, it happened again. I woke up at 2:04 a.m. The monitor was black. I sat up, my heart hammering. I looked at the Wise Cam, the little blue light blinking. I pulled up its app on my phone and scrolled back to the moment the monitor died. What I saw made the blood in my veins run cold. At 2:02 a.m., our bedroom door, which I had closed completely when we went to bed, slowly swung open. It wasn't pushed open by the wind or by a draft. It was slow, deliberate. A hand appeared on the edge of the doorframe. A man's hand. I watched as my husband, Jason, entered the room. He wasn't in his pajamas. He was wearing jeans and a dark t-shirt, his hair slightly mussed. He walked silently across the room, his bare feet making no sound on the carpet. He went straight to my nightstand, where the baby monitor sat. He picked it up. His face was illuminated by the soft glow of the screen. His expression was blank, completely neutral. He stared at the monitor for a few seconds, then his finger moved. He pressed a button on the side, a button I didn't even know existed until that moment. A recessed little switch. The screen immediately went black. He turned it off. He didn't check on the baby. He didn't look around the room. He just turned it off, set it back on the nightstand, and walked out, closing the door behind him just as silently as he had opened it. I rewatched the clip 3 times. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. The man in the video was my husband, the father of my child, the man I'd been with for 8 years. But the way he moved, the way he looked, it was like he was in a trance. Like he was sleepwalking, or like he was hiding something. I put the phone down and stared at the sleeping form of Jason beside me. He was on his back, snoring softly, completely oblivious. I felt a wave of nausea. What the hell was he doing? Why would he secretly get up in the middle of the night, get dressed, come into our room, and turn off the baby monitor? The next day, I was quiet, distant. I went through the motions of the day, making Leo's breakfast, taking him to the park, working on my designs, but my mind was a hurricane. I couldn't look at Jason the same way. Every smile, every casual touch, every "how was your day?" felt like a performance. I asked him casually if he remembered waking up at all last night. He looked at me like I was crazy. No, I slept like a log. Why, did Leo wake up? No, I said, forcing a smile. I just thought I heard something, that's all. He shrugged and went back to his laptop. The lie came so easily to him. Or maybe it wasn't a lie. Maybe he genuinely didn't remember. Maybe he really was sleepwalking. But my gut told me it was something else. Something worse. I decided I needed more evidence. I set up the Wise Cam again, but this time, I hid it better, placing it behind a stack of books on a shelf that looked directly at the door. I also downloaded a screen recording app onto my phone and set it to record the baby monitor screen. From 1:30 a.m. to 3:30 a.m., I was going to catch everything. The next few nights, the pattern continued. 2:02 a.m. on the dot. The door would open. Jason would walk in, dressed in his jeans and t-shirt. He'd walk to the nightstand, turn off the monitor, and leave. It was like clockwork. The screen recordings on my phone matched the security footage perfectly. Time, action, all of it. I started to notice other things, too. On the 4th night, I watched the Wise footage and saw that when he walked in, he paused by the door and looked at me for a long moment. His face was still blank, but there was something chilling about it. Like he was making sure I was asleep. Then he went to the monitor. On the 5th night, he didn't just turn it off. He held it up to his ear, as if listening to something. Then he turned it off and left. My mind was racing with horrific possibilities. Was he doing something to Leo? Was he abusing him in the night and covering his tracks? But Leo was always fine in the morning. Happy, healthy, no signs of trauma. Was he going outside? Was he having an affair and meeting someone in the driveway? Using the baby monitor going off as his alarm clock? But he was only gone for less than a minute each time. I started checking his things. I looked through his jacket pockets while he was in the shower. I checked his work bag. I looked at his phone when he was in the other room. There was nothing. No strange texts, no secret apps, no condoms in his wallet. He was just normal. The most unnerving thing was the precision. 2:02 a.m. Not a minute before, not a minute after. What happened at 2:02 a.m.? I started to fixate on it. 2:02. I'd be lying in bed, pretending to be asleep, and my eyes would be glued to the clock on my nightstand. 1:45, 1:50, 1:55. The minutes would crawl by, each one an eternity of dread. Then came the final night. The night I packed a bag. It was a Thursday. Jason had been acting perfectly normal all day. He'd come home from work with takeout from our favorite Thai place. He'd played with Leo in the backyard. He'd even made a joke about how the neighbors knew. Obnoxiously bright solar lights were going to ruin the stars. A normal, boring, wonderful evening. I kissed him goodnight. I told him I loved him. I meant it. I did. That was the worst part. I lay in the dark, my eyes fixed on the clock. 1:30, 1:45, 1:55, 2 o'clock. I heard the soft rustle of sheets beside me. I didn't dare move. I kept my breathing steady, my eyes closed to slits, just enough to see the door. The door opened. It was him, but this time, he was wearing his jacket. A dark, zipped-up hoodie. He walked to the nightstand, but he didn't pick up the monitor. He walked right past it. He walked around my side of the bed. He stopped, standing over me. I could feel his presence, a pressure in the air, the warmth of his body. I forced myself to stay still, to keep my breathing even though my heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. He stood there for a long time. A full minute. I could just make out his silhouette against the faint light coming from the window. His head was slightly tilted, as if he was studying me. Then, he bent down. I felt his hand on my face. His fingers were cold. He gently brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. The gesture was so tender, so intimate, it made my skin crawl. It was like he was saying goodbye. Then he straightened up and left the room. I waited. I counted to 60. I listened for the sound of the front door opening and closing. I heard it. I flew out of bed, my legs shaking. I didn't go to the front door. I ran to the office, where the laptop was, the one connected to the Wise cam. I pulled up the live feed. I watched him walk down the driveway. He didn't go to his car. He walked to the edge of the yard, near the big oak tree. He stood there, looking out at the street, his hands in his pockets. He wasn't looking at anything in particular. Just standing, waiting. Then, another figure emerged from the shadows across the street. A woman. She was dressed all in black, too. She crossed the street and walked up to him. They didn't touch. They just stood there, a few feet apart, like they were having a conversation. But I couldn't see their mouths moving. They were just looking at each other. Then, she pointed to our house. To the window of Leo's room. I watched, frozen, as Jason nodded. He turned and looked back at the house. He pointed to our bedroom window. My window. He was pointing directly at the room where I was standing. The woman nodded, and then, together, they walked back to the oak tree. They stood there, side by side, for another minute. Then, Jason turned and walked back up the driveway. The woman melted back into the shadows. I was off the laptop in a second. The adrenaline was a toxic, powerful surge in my veins. I flew to the closet and pulled out my biggest duffel bag. I didn't even think. I just grabbed clothes, shoving them in. Jeans, sweaters, shoes, Leo's clothes, his favorite blanket, his medicine. I threw a few diapers and a pack of wipes into a tote bag. My wallet, my laptop, my phone charger. I heard the front door open. He was back inside. I could hear his footsteps in the hallway. They were slow, measured, coming toward the bedroom. I was in a panic. I couldn't let him see me. I grabbed the duffel bag, the tote bag, and I slipped out of the bedroom door and into the hall. Just as he was about to turn the corner, I ducked into Leo's room. He was still asleep. I scooped him up, blanket and all. He stirred, letting out a tiny, sleepy whimper. "Shush, baby. It's okay. Mommy's here," I whispered, my voice cracking. I held him tight and moved as fast and silently as I could through the dark house. Out the back door. I didn't dare look back. I didn't go to my car. I was terrified he'd hear the engine start. Instead, I ran to the neighbor's house, the one with the obnoxious solar lights. I banged on the door, Leo crying softly in my arms. Sarah, please, let us in, please, I sobbed. I heard a voice, the woman across the street. She was at the edge of my driveway, standing under the streetlight, just watching me. Watching me try to get into the neighbor's house. She didn't move, she didn't try to stop me. She just watched, and smiled. Sarah, our neighbor, opened the door. She took one look at my face, at Leo in my arms, at my frantic, terrified state. And she pulled us inside without a single question. She locked the door behind us. I collapsed on her kitchen floor, sobbing, holding Leo, who was now wailing. I was terrified for him. I was terrified for myself. What was Jason doing? Who was that woman? Why was he pointing at me? At Leo? I didn't have any answers. All I had was the image of him standing over me, brushing my hair, and then walking out to meet her. And her smile, that cold, knowing smile. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I was too scared, too confused. Who would believe me? The good husband, the devoted father? What would I even say? I just sat there on Sarah's kitchen floor, rocking Leo back to sleep, my mind racing. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't go back there. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing for certain. I was never going back to that house. I packed a bag, and I ran. And I have no idea what he was doing, or who she was, or what was going to happen to us now, but the fear in my gut told me I was right to run. It told me I had to protect my son. And right now, the only way to do that was to put as much distance as possible between us in whatever that was. Story number 6. My husband's business trip got exposed by a $14.99 charge. It's 2 a.m. and I'm sitting in my car in a 7-Eleven parking lot because I can't breathe. My husband, Mark, told me 2 weeks ago that he had to fly to Dallas for a mandatory corporate retreat. He was so convincing. He showed me the fake itinerary he printed out. He complained about the hotel options. He even let me pack his carry-on. I felt like a good wife seeing him off. He kissed my forehead and said he would be back in 6 days. I work from home as a freelance graphic designer. It's quiet without him. I'm used to his noise, his loud phone calls, his footsteps. But on the 3rd day, I got an alert on my phone. I have a shared credit card with him that we only use for emergencies, but it has a low limit. I got a ping for a charge of $14.99 at a gas station. That wasn't the weird part. The weird part was the location. It wasn't Dallas. It was Miami, Florida. My brain broke for a few minutes. I refreshed the banking app a dozen times. I checked his location sharing that he insisted we have for safety. It was off. It had been off for 3 days, but he had told me it was a battery issue. I called his cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I texted him. I sent a simple, "How is the conference?" He replied an hour later with a picture of a generic hotel room and a text that said, "Stuck in meetings, miss you." The time zone didn't match. The lighting was all wrong. I started digging. I went into our Amazon account and checked his recent purchases. He had bought a very specific type of sunscreen that you only wear in tropical places and a new pair of swim trunks. He hates swimming. I checked his Instagram. I didn't see any new posts, but I saw a story highlight from a woman I didn't recognize. Her name is Chloe. She has a private account. But her profile picture is a selfie in front of a pool with a drink that has one of those little umbrellas in it. I'm not proud of what I did next. I went through his desk. I found a receipt for a jewelry store. It was a ring box purchase. I don't wear rings. The receipt was dated the day before he left. I stared at the receipt and felt the air leave the room. He didn't leave for work. He left to propose to someone else, or to run away with someone. I don't know. I called his best friend, Kevin. Kevin was silent for a very long time. Then he said, "Look, Beth, I didn't want to get involved." He told me Mark has been seeing this woman from his gym for over a year. Kevin even went on a double date with them once. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my phone. I am now sitting in a 7-Eleven parking lot at 2 a.m. chain smoking a pack of cigarettes I bought even though I quit 3 years ago. I have to go back to the empty house. I have to contact a lawyer tomorrow. I feel like the world's biggest fool. I trusted him completely. He was my best friend. He was my everything. Now I'm just a woman sitting in the dark, watching the lights flicker and wondering if I ever really knew him at all. ## Story 2. Relationship_advice. Title. **** My girlfriend's weird habit with her memory box is starting to scare me. I, 28, David, have been dating my girlfriend, Jessica, 27, for almost 2 years. Everything is perfect, or so I thought. She's kind, she's smart, she's a pediatric nurse, which I think takes a special kind of person. But she has this one thing she does that is starting to freak me out. She has a memory box in our closet. I always thought it was just old photos and ticket stubs, you know, normal stuff. I never touched it because everyone is entitled to their privacy. A few weeks ago, I woke up at 3 a.m. to find her gone from bed. I went to the living room, and she was sitting on the floor in the dark, just holding the box. She wasn't crying or anything. She was just sitting there, rocking slightly and staring at a photo. I asked her what was wrong. She snapped the lid shut and said she was just having trouble sleeping. She quickly went back to bed and didn't say another word. It was unsettling. Then things started getting weird. I noticed she was taking the box with her to the bathroom when she showered. She would bring it to the kitchen table when she was just scrolling through her phone. She even clutched it when she fell asleep on the couch watching Netflix. I started to get concerned. I asked her about it again a few days ago. I tried to be gentle. I said, "Jess, is everything okay? You're acting very attached to that box." She got defensive immediately. She accused me of not trusting her and invading her privacy. She said I was being controlling. I backed off because I didn't want to start a fight. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. So yesterday, while she was at work, I looked in the box. I know I shouldn't have, but my anxiety was through the roof. Inside, it wasn't photos of us. There were only 3 things. A letter from a woman named Sarah, a key to a safety deposit box, and a small black flash drive. The letter was dated 5 years ago. It was written in a scrawled, shaky hand. It basically said, "If you're reading this, I'm gone. He will come looking for me. You have to protect him." I don't understand any of it. Who is Sarah? Who is the him she's talking about? Is it me? Is Jessica in danger? Is she protecting me from something? I feel like I've stumbled into a movie. I didn't tell her I looked, but I can't sleep. I keep looking at her and seeing a stranger. She just kissed me goodbye this morning and said she loved me. I said it back, but my voice felt hollow. I don't know if I should confront her about the box, check the safety deposit box myself, or just pretend I never saw anything and leave. I am scared of her, and I hate that feeling. ### Story 3. Legal advice. Title. **** My elderly father signed a new will while heavily medicated in the hospital. I'm located in Florida. My father, Robert, 76, just had a major stroke 3 weeks ago. His health has been declining for the last year. He was diagnosed with early-stage dementia, but he was still mostly lucid. He lived with me and my wife, Susan, and I was his primary caregiver. I'm his only child. My name is Anthony. My mother passed away 10 years ago. Last week, my father had a serious medical emergency and was rushed to the hospital. He was in the ICU for 5 days. He was on a heavy cocktail of painkillers, sedatives, and antibiotics. His cognition was severely impaired. He was confused, lethargic, and had a hard time recognizing me or his nurses. He was in no state to make legal decisions. While he was in this state, his younger sister, my aunt, Patricia, flew down from New York to help. She was always the golden child. She was always jealous that I was closer to my dad. When she arrived, she took charge. She started talking to the hospital staff, telling them she was his next of kin. I argued, but the nurses were busy, and I didn't want to cause a scene in front of my ailing father. On the 3rd day of his ICU stay, Patricia demanded that a notary and a lawyer be brought to his room. I tried to stop it. I told the lawyer that my father was not of sound mind. I told the hospital staff. They all looked at me with pity but didn't intervene. Patricia told everyone I was just a worried son, and that Robert had requested this. My father, barely conscious, was propped up in bed. The lawyer read a document to him. He mumbled something that could have been, yes, or could have been a groan of pain. He signed with a shaky hand. Patricia took the document immediately. I found out yesterday from my father's old estate attorney, who is a family friend, that Patricia has filed a new will with the county. The old will left everything to me. The new will, signed in the hospital, leaves 80% of the estate to Patricia and only 20% to me. It also names her as the executor. My father doesn't have a huge estate, but it's everything we have. It's the family home I grew up in, where I live now. I am terrified I am about to lose my home. I have already contacted an elder law attorney and filed a motion to contest the will based on undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. I have the medical records from the hospital showing his state of confusion. My wife recorded a video of him that day where he couldn't even remember his own birthday. I also have witness testimony from the nursing staff who told me they thought it was odd he was signing legal documents. I know contesting a will is an uphill battle, and it could take years. What evidence is most crucial to prove he was incapacitated? And what should I do to protect myself if Patricia starts trying to access his bank accounts now? Story 4. What should I do? Title. ****, my best friend's fiancé tried to kiss me and I don't know how to tell her. I'm a 29-year-old woman named Danielle. My best friend, Amanda, has been with her fiancé, Brian, for 4 years. I've known Brian for almost as long. We were all part of the same friend group in college. I've never had any feelings for him. He's a nice guy, a bit quiet, but he makes Amanda happy. That's all that matters to me. Last weekend, I had a few drinks at a bar with Brian. Amanda was stuck at work late, so Brian and I went to grab a drink to pass the time. We were just chatting about their upcoming wedding, the venue, and the catering. I was telling him how excited I was for them. He seemed a little off, a little quiet. I thought he was just tired. When we left the bar, he said he wanted to walk me to my car. My car was parked in a somewhat dark alley behind the bar. We were saying goodbye, and I went in for a quick, friendly hug. That's when it happened. He pulled me in tighter and tried to kiss me on the lips. I turned my head so fast I almost gave myself whiplash, and his lips hit my cheek. I pushed him away hard and stepped back. I was shocked. I couldn't even speak. He just stood there, looking embarrassed. He started apologizing profusely. He said he was drunk, he didn't know what came over him, and he was so sorry. He begged me not to tell Amanda. He said it would ruin everything. He said it was a stupid mistake and he loved her more than anything. I told him to leave me alone and I drove home in a complete daze. I haven't been able to sleep or eat properly since. I'm terrified of Amanda. I'm supposed to be her maid of honor. The wedding is in 3 weeks. If I tell her, I am terrified I will destroy her. She is so excited and so happy. Will she even believe me? She might think I'm jealous or trying to sabotage her relationship. What if she chooses him and I lose my best friend? But if I don't tell her? She is marrying a man who tried to kiss her best friend while she was working late. What if he does it again? What if he actually cheats on her? How can I stand up at the altar and watch her marry a man who did this to her? I feel like I'm carrying a bomb around in my chest, waiting for it to explode on the wedding day. Should I risk the friendship and the wedding to be honest? Or should I keep this secret to protect her happiness and save our friendship? Story 5. AITA. Title. ****, my brother is moving to another country with his new wife but refuses to pay back my $10,000. I'm 34, and my name is Chris. My older brother, Jason, 37, has always been the charismatic one. He's the guy who can talk himself out of anything. He's charming, funny, and always has $1 million idea that never quite works out. 2 years ago, he came to me with a sob story. He said he had a chance to invest in a food truck business with a friend. He was $10,000 short. He said it was his one shot to be financially stable and get his life together. I had just gotten a promotion at my accounting firm and had some savings. I felt bad for him. I told him I would loan him the money. We shook on it, and I transferred the money to his account. He promised he would pay me back within a year, with interest. A year passed. Nothing. I reminded him. He said the business was slow. 6 more months passed. I mentioned it again. He said he had a lot of expenses. Last month, Jason dropped a bombshell. He married a woman named Elena, a woman he met online from Spain. They've known each other for only 6 months. He announced they are moving to Madrid to start a new life. He was so excited. He sold his car, sold his furniture, and gave up his apartment. I congratulated him, but then I brought up the $10,000. He got incredibly defensive. He told me that I have no heart. He said I'm a tightwad who has a steady job and a 401k, while he's struggling to find his path. He said that family is more important than money and that I should just let it go. He basically made me feel like a villain for asking for money he owes me. Elena was sitting there, nodding along, calling me difficult. I completely lost my cool. I started shouting. I told him he's a deadbeat and a thief. I told him that I worked hard for that money. I gave it to him because I believed in him, and he used me. I told him if he leaves the country without paying me, I'm taking him to small claims court. The dinner ended with him grabbing Elena's hand and storming out, calling me a selfish, toxic brother. Now the whole family is split. My parents are saying I should let it go to keep the peace. They think I'm being selfish for pursuing legal action and causing drama right before his big move. They think the money is gone and I should just be happy for him. But I'm not. I feel used. I feel like he made a fool out of me. I had to sacrifice a vacation to save that money. I work hard for what I have. Jason is acting like I'm the bad guy for wanting my money back. So, AITA for demanding he pay me back immediately and threatening to sue him if he moves to Spain. Without settling his debt to me? My husband's business trip got exposed by a $14.99 charge. I finally went home that night after sitting in the 7-Eleven parking lot until the sun started to rise. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling and replayed every single moment of the last 2 years in my head. I thought about all the times he came home late and said he was at the gym. I thought about the weekends he spent working on his laptop in the living room while I was in the bedroom. I thought about how he stopped initiating intimacy about 8 months ago and I just chalked it up to stress. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of red flags I had ignored because I loved him. When morning came, I called a lawyer. Her name is Margaret, and she specializes in divorce and family law. I told her everything over the phone, and she told me to gather as much documentation as possible. She told me not to confront Mark until I had a clear plan. She told me to document the credit card charges, the Amazon purchases, and any texts or emails I had. So I spent the entire day taking screenshots, printing bank statements, and recording every single detail. I even found an old receipt in his car for a jewelry store that I didn't recognize when I went out to check the glove compartment. It was for a ring, a very expensive ring. On the 5th day of his trip, he called me. He sounded happy. He told me he missed me and that he was wrapping up his meetings early. He said he was catching a flight back the next day. I played along. I told him I missed him too and I couldn't wait to see him. I asked him how the weather was in Dallas. He paused for a second and said, "It's hot, you know how Texas is." Texas. He was still lying. My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone. But I felt a cold resolve settle in my chest. When he walked through the front door the next evening, he had a huge smile on his face. He dropped his suitcase and came to hug me. I let him. I even hugged him back. I looked him in the eyes and said, "How was Miami?" His face drained of all color. He stuttered. He tried to laugh it off. He said, "Miami? What are you talking about?" I was in Dallas. I pulled out my phone and showed him the credit card alert. I showed him the gas station charge in Miami. I showed him the Amazon purchases. I showed him the receipt for the ring. He crumbled. He fell to his knees right there in the entryway of our home. He started crying. He confessed everything. He told me he had been seeing Chloe for over a year. He met her at the gym, and it started as just flirting, but it turned into something more. He said he was in love with her. He said he was planning to propose to her in Miami. He said he was going to come back and tell me he wanted a divorce. But he was too much of a coward to do it before he left. He begged me for forgiveness, but not for the affair. He begged me to understand his feelings. He actually had the audacity to ask me to be amicable about the divorce because he didn't want to hurt me more than he already had. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked at him and said, "Get out." He asked where he was supposed to go. I told him I didn't care. I told him to go to Miami. He packed a small bag and left. The next morning, I had the locks change. I filed for divorce that afternoon. My lawyer says I have a very strong case because of his infidelity and the fact that he used marital funds to buy the ring for another woman. I'm not going to take him for everything. But I'm not going to let him walk away without consequences. I've been staying with my sister for the past few days because I can't stand being in that house alone. I still have moments where I break down and cry, but then I remember that I didn't lose anything. I just found out who he really is. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be more than fine. I'm going to rebuild my life without a liar in it.